Yeah, so that's it again with the test match. Morena everyone, and welcome to Strategy, Finance and Risk Committee meeting on Monday the 7th of August 2023. I don't know where the year's going, but it's going pretty fast. Just a reminder in terms of health and safety, if the alarm sounds, we make our way out the back door there and assemble across the road and wait for instructions. Everyone needs to be aware, of course, that this meeting is being live streamed and the video will be publicly available on YouTube. Reminder to turn your phones onto silent or off. Can I ask Shad to open with a karakia, please?
Morena tātou, huri ake rā ki ngā kaimahi, kia koutou kua huitahina I tēnei ata, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Kia koe rā Anne, kia koe rā Christine, hei māngai kōrero, mo te kaunihira, nō reira tēnā koe, nō reira tēnā tātou, nō reira kēnui tātou. I te atua anei rā mātou e huitahina I tēnei ata, I te atua ka tuku ngā whakamaumitu ngā whakawhetai ki a koe, maumana ki tanga katoa. A mana ki tia rā tātou I ngā ahutanga I ngā take ora nei. Kia whaihua rahi tika mā tātou katoa. Nō reire te atua tēnei mātuna tēnei ki a koe. Korore ki tō ngā tapu. Harmony.
Thank you, Shad. So any apologies? So we've got Bill Wasley is an apology and hopefully Tapio's on the way. Would someone like to move? Shad and Stephen, thank you. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you very much. We have no one booked for the public forum today, no late items, no confidential business that I'm aware of being brought into open, and no change to the order of business. That brings us to the minutes of the meeting on the 26th of June. Any comments, questions on the minutes? No? Someone like to move? Thank you, Wayne and Stephen, that they're a true and correct record. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Any declarations of conflicts of interest? Shad.
Just in relation to the discussion on water reform, part of my other work intersects with Three Waters, so I won't contribute to that part of the discussion.
Morena, just the same as Shad, yeah, there might be a perceived conflict of interest around some of my other work, which intersects with the water services reform.
Thank you very much. Those are noted. No deputations, presentations or petitions today. No recommendations from other committees. That brings us to the 6-monthly Treasury strategy update, and we have Suresh with us. Is he going to present first, Paul? I think we just turned the camera off because he looked a bit lonely sitting at the far end of the table until we'd done all that. Bring him back in now. Good morning. Good morning. There we are. We're zooming in. And you're on mute.
There we go. Thank you. We're good now. I am zooming in and dialed in early, just, with technology. See how that works or doesn't work. Now, am I able to share some slides?
Yes, yes, you are.
Right, good, thank you. One moment. Please let me know when all that will be visible.
That is up now. Thank you, Suresh.
Good, thank you very much. Right, I still think I will dart through these rather quickly just to get to the point in the story, what's still playing out. So when we last met, obviously inflation was the concern and still is the concern, but positively now we are definitely over the peak. And you can see from these numerous regions, including us, that the peak has been reached and the slide is on its way down. It's encouraging to see people like the US, they are back at 3%. So they're getting into the zone, which is that 1 to 3 target. And we are also on our way down. Problem is for New Zealand, our data is always quarterly and lagging, where most of all the other regions are able to generate data on a monthly basis. So they are what I'd say is more ahead of knowing what's happening. So we are now there at 6%, but certainly heading in the right way, but still more work to do. On this chart, I think for us, the most worrying thing from a whole global perspective as an exporter is China. And China has inflation at the moment at 0, and just almost clinging on potentially to sort of going into a deflationary period. So that worries us more than our slide in inflation, because as we know, China is our biggest customer and it has wobbles, right? So that remains a new concern for us. On the domestic side, inflation there, this is the annual rate. We're running at 6% there in the June quarter. The key things to highlight, which I think puts us at a different level compared to the rest of the world, is our food prices are still holding up quite high, where the rest of the world seems to have seen a drop in food a lot quicker. Groceries up 13, and fruit and veg, due to the weather that we're all well aware of, up a whopping 21%. So that is still a bit of a headwind for us. Housing, utilities, up 6%. One of the key drivers there still is home ownership, and that covers the costs of maintenance, repairs, etc. Rentals are up, and also property rates and related services at 7.3%. So those two things, housing and food, are still reasonably large generators of inflation for us here. Leading on from where, concerns around China, we have seen our commodity prices fall. And here this chart shows both in US dollar terms and Kiwi dollar terms. And when you reflect on the Kiwi dollar terms, the Kiwi, as hopefully a lot of people know, the Kiwi dollar is under pressure. We're at just under 61 cents this morning. And it's basically there for a reason. And that is, our ability to export. Our economy is looking a bit rough, and that Kiwi dollar is under pressure. And with the fall in commodity prices we've seen internationally, it is giving us a bit of relief, but not enough. And in the last week, we have seen Fonterra slice $1 off its forecast payout, which is big news. And that's roughly $5 billion flowing or not coming in to our economy in the next season for them. Now, there's probably potentially some more downward pressure there for Fonterra pricing there as well, but a bit of a worry. This chart there, again, a bit of interest there on just showing what's happening with debt. Debt seems to be, a bit hard now under high interest rates, and we are seeing the response to that. And what this shows is most sectors are declining in their borrowing. Housing there, which is the blue one, has been on a slide since last year, and business borrowings has just taken a slide as well, as concerns mount over the domestic side, obviously, and international markets with commodity prices coming off. And you can see down the green line, which is the agricultural sector, which has very prudently been paying down debt for the last 5 years, has just ticked up into positive territory. Now, we suspect that's a little bit more of a case of the agri sector having to borrow to stay afloat, basically, as commodity prices come off and their revenues drop. So they're having to borrow to keep the businesses going. Now, just another little thing here on housing markets, which seems to be the big topic. Now, this is the Knight Frank Global Survey, or a report that they do on global house prices. And this was the latest one we have is for the March quarter. It shows there down the bottom at number 55. New Zealand now is, 55 out of 56 worst housing markets in the world of this list. Now, what's interesting to note is we were number 2 behind Turkey last year as the second most rampant housing market in the world. Now, Turkey's got a whole list of its own problems, including inflation that's been running at between 50 and 80% over the last 2 years. So that's why their house prices are still sort of knocking up their 132% increase. But this is worrying that we've only really got South Korea in front of us in terms of this measure of house prices. So this continues to reflect unease around our high interest rates, which is where we're trying to get to in this quick session, is that the high interest rates we are under at the moment are probably or very likely to be unsustainable for extended periods. But we're here right now to curtail inflation, and it appears to be working. Sorry. Now, on this chart here, I've tried to sort of cram in a few things from the Reserve Bank to give us some colour on their thinking and their views, because the housing market obviously is kind of key for them, and the action that's been in households and spending, because it's kind of related. So top left there, we can see house price inflation has clearly peaked last year and has been sliding, but appears to have found a base. The level of fall would be in excess of what we saw in 2007 during the GFC, which is now 15 years ago, believe it or not. And the reason this has happened is, to the chart to the right, is that mortgage rates have been inching up as we have taken the cash rate to 550. Now, mortgage rates are now around 7%, but those are the headline rates that we're seeing in the papers. And one of the reasons we haven't probably seen the worst of the impact of this yet is that the average mortgage rate in play at the moment still for households is around 4.5%. As people roll off those cheap rates, they rolled off 2, they went into 4s, they've got to come off the 4s in the next 6 months, and then they're going to hit the 7s, and that's when, we'll really see the impact on households peak. At the moment, it's still a bit of a slow burn. Now, this is also having quite a big impact on consents and residential investments, which is on the bottom left. And this includes some forecasts from the Reserve Bank that were done in May. We're expecting an update of this in a couple of weeks, in mid-August, at the next big MPS. And it just shows that they are expecting consents to fall, and we are seeing that. And this does have implications for future residential investment, because, there has been a shortage of houses. We have a lot of houses that have been built and are about to hit the market. But the pipeline beyond that has been strangled a bit because of the high cost of interest rates. And so there is going to be a downward tilt there. Now, the bottom right there is the one that I think will interest most people. Is, we have these record high interest rates, 550 at the moment, cash rate, and it's a level we're not seeing since 2007, so that's kind of scary. This chart on the bottom right was done in May, so it doesn't reflect the hikes that we're seeing. So that blue line in the top is actually at 550. But the lines we should be focusing on are the light blue, the red, and the purple, and that is the range of where the Reserve Bank still sees neutral. And the neutral rate for the cash rate is still between 2 and 375. So at 550, we really are well above the neutral, and we're going to expect that to do quite a bit of damage or slow the economy. And even in the last week, referring to Fonterra downgrading its payout by $1 is just another little headwind or a problem that's going to weigh on our domestic economy. But I think that's what we need to take away from this meeting is we are well above neutral. Rates have peaked and they appear to be very unsustainable at the levels that we are at, despite the fact that, the council and most councils have got a lot of money to borrow over the next few years to invest. The rates that we've seen at the moment are the peak. And that is confirmed here by this chart here, which is our swap rates. And it's a very, very busy chart. I think underneath that, the red line is the cash rate. The black line at the very top is the actual floating rate. And all the other blue coloured lines are the swap rates. And for about the last year, they have gyrated between 4% and 5%, indicating the peak for the cash rate, but also trying to get guidance on when we're going to start to get cuts or when the market is going to see rates start to ease back or fall. Now, at the moment, the Reserve Bank is not indicating cuts because it still wants to get inflation back into the 1 to 3% range. But the market has priced cuts from August next year, with around 50 basis points of cuts priced in for the end of next year. So starting in August, and then we'll have a cash rate back under 5% after that. Now, a lot of this is going to depend on how the economy behaves, but high interest rates are delivering the damage. We've seen house prices fall, wealth ease back. We've seen spending starting to respond to that. And hopefully next year, all councils, including Tauranga, will get some relief on interest rates. Right, that's it for me. I've tried to keep it short, but I'm happy to accept questions.
Thank you very much. I don't know whether to thank you, but it's, it's a bit
I
depressing.
get a lot of that.
Yeah. I'm sure you do. Any questions, Bruce?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah, for your oversight. It's as you say, it was a depressing year. It's reality, I guess. Perhaps the critical thing is that you're holding out that there is some light at the end of the tunnel. One of the catchphrases that for those of us that were at the local government conference, it's been around for a long time, at least in the current political currency of the day, is cost of living. And actually the impact that has on us as a council being able to rate our community. And I just wonder, with those settings, where you see the household cost of living going in the near term. And I ask that because near term being, so let's say the next 3 years, because of course we're in the process of trying to settle on an LTP.
Yep. And that's yes, the cost of living, well, that's inflation. And in that second chart, I showed you that food and households and household related costs, including rates, were still key drivers in inflation. And that's, you put that into non-tradable inflation, which households cannot do anything about. So unable to control rates, electricity, all those sort of things, power bills. And that's where it appears a lot of money is going. We are seeing pain, I suppose, in that sort of consumer credit area. You know, what is it, that buy now, pay later? You know, you see every email you get from, I don't know, somebody who bought some meat online, now they're accept buy now, pay later. And that has been happening now for a couple of years. And that has set alarm bells ringing. If somebody is putting fruit and vegetables and meat on credit to pay over 4 weeks. So households are under, I believe, extreme pressure, some more than others. And there's always the element, there is part of the economy that can weather this. But on average, yes, it is tough out there. And to take further rate hikes will be difficult.
So given the households are in a relatively, I think you said, non-tradable position, what's your prediction over the next 3 years?
For what, cost of living? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep. Well, I'm hoping food prices come back. I think the discretionary spend is about to fall off a cliff. I think people are not going to be, you know, running down to the local Evo shop, which I seem to keep getting them for bike sales. I think all those discretionary spends are going to drop, but food, rates, power, electricity, all those basics, including insurance, those costs will have to be met, and people will have to find money from somewhere to withstand those. But that, you know, I don't, if you just reflect on council rates, I don't think there's one council out there that's not got a reasonably large uptick in their rates costs.
Thanks, Darius. And I mean, and that reflects, I think, the conversation, whether it was here or Bay of Plenty region, I can't remember which now, where the problem we face is the new normal. I don't think the cost of living is an overnight thing, and I presume you've had this discussion when you've got into your long-term plan, that actually this rate pressure is not going to go away, at least in the immediate and foreseeable future. Perhaps as it reflects as a comment I made to you earlier before, it actually now places, I think, a lot of pressure on us. What's our other revenue sources, and how can we maximise those or create new ones? Thank you. Appreciate it, Darius.
Yeah, if I just might add one thing finally, I think the one to think will be to focus on arrears is when people struggle to pay their rates, and suddenly you start seeing that number edge up. Even in the corporate space, you know, we've noticed, you know, people who pay, you know, pushing out payments a month, you know, the pressures are there, cash flow pressures, even for businesses, pushing out payments. And that's when people should start to get a bit nervous about what's happening.
Any other questions? Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
You're not going to solve any problems for us, are you?
No. The only thing I believe the council should think about is that, yes, all councils have got to spend money, some more than others, some by not any fault of theirs, you know, weather and all that's happened. But that's not going to happen overnight, and that spend is still going to take time to occur. And interest rates, we've hit the peak, so moderation will come in due course, and hopefully that times with when debt actually peaks. But yeah, we are at the peak interest rates, and it's pretty hard. It would be pretty hard to comprehend interest rates going higher from here.
Yeah. Thank you. And of course, our problem is we're trying to backfill as well as do the normal
Yes.
work of a big growing city.
And then the water reforms continues to muddy the outlook, because we just don't know when that money's coming.
Yeah. Okay. Look, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Tapio, welcome.
I'll dial out.
Okay. Oh, yes, appreciate that.
Thank you.
Nice wall, nice wall. Okay, Paul, back to you.
I'll probably just hand straight over to Cherie to go through the report. So it's the regular 6-month update. Does touch on some of the elements that Suresh has covered, and in particular our approach around water reform and how we're treating that.
Good morning. So as Paul said, this is the usual 6-monthly report to this committee to cover the performance and operations of Treasury function, and obviously kind of reflecting what Suresh has just covered and how that's impacted us. Other than providing an update, this report also seeks to approve for an increase to cash held from $10 million to $15 million, and this is reflective of the increasing cash flow requirements that we're seeing in our monthly outflows. The report also acknowledges the incoming legislative changes for how organisations have to hold and report on their retentions. So this will require us to hold our retentions, any new retentions, in either a trust or set up a financial instrument for those. That's from the 1st of October, but more detail on this will come to you next month in the triennial Treasury policy review. So to summarise the key figures from the report, and for the 2023 financial year, our gross debt is $948 million against a budget of $903 million. So that's $45 million higher than budget. Net debt is $835 million against a budget of $850 million. That's $35 million lower than budget. So we had a bit on investment at the end of the year because we received quite a lot of money right at the end of the year from central government. We issued $230 million of debt in 2023, which is $45 million higher than the initial borrowing program linked to the annual plan. That additional borrowing was covered in additional borrowing requests made to council throughout the year. The current borrowing program for 2024 is set to reach $1.1 billion gross debt. Interest costs for the year were higher than budget by $4 million, but these were offset by interest revenue. So the net interest costs were $400K above budget. This reflects decision-making around short-term investment. It also reflects old debt that's sitting on lower interest rates, old fixed debt. The average cost of borrowing for 2023, excluding margins, was 3.92% against benchmarkers of 4.26%. In the report, we also included what our fixed debt profile looks like with and without waters reform. This is based on very draft and indicative debt figures for the LTP that's coming in. There's also a pretty high level assumption around the debt settlement as well. In both scenarios, we're above the minimum of the policy line, but with waters in, we are skirting quite close, and we're monitoring that with every debt issuance that we make. And if we need to lift us up above that bottom band, we'll do forward swaps just to keep us above it until we know more about what's happening with waters reform. I'll take any questions.
Thanks very much. Can I just the legislation around retentions, that's to protect subcontractors.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Any questions? Great deal of uncertainty around Three Waters and the effect.
Oh.
Everyone thinks it, yeah. It's
Look, all I was going to ask, sorry, all I was going to ask was, and I started, Paul, that with the uncertainty the paper suggests, and sorry, it could be you that needs to answer this question, the ongoing need to negotiate with NI, NTU. Presumably the prior negotiation, though, shows the sort of form and nature of whatever that is. It's just really between now and then, as in contrast to a fundamental rethink or renegotiation.
Yeah, that's correct. So we've had initial conversations with NTU, and are largely agreed around what that number was at the end of 22. That will then roll forward as we move forward. But we're in constant, in anything that's outside of vanilla, we're in contact with them in terms of what that might look like.
You have to move those swaps to get yourself above the margin. You can still negotiate your way with NTU to see them out, and we don't suffer any cost.
That's still kind of yet to be seen. We're in constant conversations with the NTU around. They're very aware of what our constraints are, that we're very close to that debt ceiling. And I think that they're still trying to decide how that final debt figure is derived. And there is talk about mark-to-market valuations, so that will bring in the swap values as well.
Just for any of the public listening, the NTU is the National Transition Unit, which is set up to manage the water reforms.
Home accountability, and so that reflects our need for the position here that you're outlining is clearly having to be managed closely with NTUs, or the National Transition Unit's position and view. Thank you.
Wayne.
Thank you, Chair. Again, look, it's really a high level, because it's just, I suppose I'm sitting here thinking I'm wanting to hear comfort around something that there's so much uncertainty, and I know it's a hard call, but Suresh, he went through, he's provided some data there, and it's really to do with the debt revenue sort of positions where, and I know it's an ongoing thing that we look at. I think he did put up there some data with regards to the consent, for building was probably going to drop. So that's revenue streams. So I suppose the comfort I'm looking for is that, although I think there was some good news in there, in the sense that supposedly we've sort of topped out with inflation and interest rates will holding pattern is here to go. I think, and I think that was perhaps backed up with the data we saw this morning earlier, that period of pain that we're going to experience is probably a little bit longer than we all anticipated. So I suppose the question is, for the comfort I'm wanting to hear this morning around the economic and the financial data, is, we're factoring that in. We can hold that pattern, although revenue availability will go up and down in different areas. I want to hear that we're okay, we're on top of this, and we can survive if it extends for a longer period than anticipated.
The short answer is yes. Obviously, as we work through our long-term plan process, we have the ability to move things forward and backwards depending on what happens in economic cycles effectively within there. So it's we try to build our long-term plan with as much flexibility in it as possible to deal with those things as they come. But it's based on the current forecast. We know, we have rates locked into our long-term plan at what the best forecast we've got for a long-term interest rate. That obviously is a higher number than the last one, but that will continue to change. So the answer is, to the best of our ability, we factor that in. But there'll be external shocks that we don't know. That's it there. We have balance sheet capacity to deal with some of those shocks as well as we go forward, though.
But I think the challenge for us, and Bruce alluded to it, is that we have to look, and as a commission, we've started the project of looking at a fair share of the costs. Who is paying, and are they paying a fair share? And there's paper later on that. So we have to start looking at not just the rating system, but all the services that the council is providing, and who's paying for them and who's benefiting from them, so that over the next 3-4 years, as I say, we're trying to backfill as well as do current and prepare for the future. And we can't put that, it's an enormous pressure to put on particularly our residential ratepayers, and particularly, well, even our commercial ratepayers. We've got another increase coming this year, and we heard businesses really hurting. If the what's the term, the discretionary spend drops, our businesses are going to suffer, and so we can't just rely on putting the rates up. And we have a significant portion of our population who are on fixed incomes, so we Yeah, we have to, I mean, we had that discussion through the user fees and charges for the annual plan. We just have to focus on how else we can raise income.
Thank you, Chair. And look, concur, and I know there's wonderful initiatives in place and thinking, but part of my question was sort of anticipated lag as well. I mean, it takes time to get these things in place. And again, that's that comfort as long as it, yeah, so you alluded to one part, we've got a balance sheet there that can take up some of this, some of the pressure if need be at certain times. But again, it's the very high level comfort that, we can hold in this period.
The other thing that I'll add, and Jim can jump in if this has changed since the last information that I had, but Cerise mentioned that monitoring of collection data, which we constantly monitor as well. We did see some movement start to happen in that, but I think it's relatively stable at the moment. But it is one thing that we do constantly monitor effectively to see how that is balancing.
I think just to add to that, when we model for the debt to revenue ratio in the long-term plan, we know what the limits are with our GFA, but we generally hold an internal limit as well to build in that capacity for unforeseen circumstances.
Else on this report? Te Pio.
Morena, ko e tūreiti, o re nari ko taia tinana mai, no reira mihia hoki nei ki a koto katoa. I just got a quick question really, and you can probably just remind me. So we've got 9.48 billion, and that increased by 230 mil. What was that 234?
The 230 million of borrowing was all the borrowing that was required to mainly deliver the capital program for the 2023 financial year.
And just add to that, so the report coming up will show a $287 million spend on capital, so that's a big chunk of what that borrowing is for. One of the other things I should point out is the reason, one of the reasons for that movement between the debt balances, the timing of the decisions around the elder housing proceeds, which has meant that our borrowing is a little bit higher. That will reflect back next year when that decision's completed.
Okay, someone like to, Stephen.
I was just going to move the recommendations, Chair.
Thank you. And Bruce seconding, thank you very much. So that's the recommendations on page 28. Includes maintenance, that change to the 15 million rather than 10 million in cash and short-term investments, and the retention monies. Any discussion on those recommendations? No? All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. And that brings us to the review of rating categories. And got Jim coming up. We have Philip coming up to talk to us, and Jim. Welcome.
Just briefly to introduce this paper, so coming out of the long-term plan was a decision to look at the creation of further rating categories, particularly in the industrial land area. So staff have engaged Philip Jones from PJ and Associates to do some work around looking at specific categories. This paper sets out the decision, which to summarise is that there's not enough evidence or information at present to create the category and differentiate on the category, but with projected forward potential, or not potential, but movement in this area is something that we'd be recommending to the creation of the category and then build it up over time as more evidence is gathered and more impact of that industrial sector. So I'll hand over to Jim and Philip.
I think it's just worth noting that this is a continuation of the LTP, so it's a 3-year, we've been looking at this for 3 years. We've had insight economics, and we've also had grey matter looking at the transportation activity, but this also looks at the wider scope of all sort of council activities. So we'll pass you over to Philip, who will talk about what he's found when he looked at the financial expenditure on the transportation activity.
Thank you. So basically, just I'll take you what the report has read. But the key issue here is that you already have a differential on commercial industrial, and there was nothing in there that actually said this is a wrong differential. But what's noted is that there is actually projected significant future expenditure in supporting the industrial areas of the city. Because of the lack of current data, you can't just rely on the pure who benefits or exacerbators to actually charge a differential. However, if the council or commissioners wanted to explore using section 102, so 101.3b, right, got to get it right, which allows the council to consider the overall impacts on the community of any group of ratepayers. There is a provision to allow a separate differential, and that doesn't necessarily have to relate to identified expenditure, but it's the council's entire view of the overall impact. Now, some of those impacts are non-financial. For example, safety on the roads, environmental impacts of pollution and noise, which can't be quantified. So that is actually an avenue that is open to the council if they so wish to explore that. Now, it's not something that's commonly done around the country at the moment, but there's been a couple of court cases which actually, one is still in train, and one was resolved with the Auckland case, that actually supports that approach. There are a couple of councils that have used it for specific properties. They're saying is the overall impact of these groups of properties in a very located area, they should be paying proportionally more because of the overall impact. But that needs to be carefully explained, and there needs to be good rationale behind that before you can actually go down that particular route. But the door is open. The question is, how far does the council want to open that door? As well as, as Paul has talked about, is actually updating the actual expenditure or forecast expenditure as the council gets better data and goes forward. That's basically it in a nutshell.
So thank you, Philip. So basically you're saying the door's open, but we still need to do, if we decided to go down that section 101? 3B, that we've still got a lot of work to do to justify that.
Council would need to actually understand what the overall impacts were and clearly articulate why it is actually having that higher differential for those groups of properties.
See the fingers going. Bruce. And then Wayne.
Phil, good to see
you.
And
then Stephen.
I just wonder, Phil, can you just characterise for me though, what is that information? I hear your point about the impacts. So 101.3b gives us the concept of the impacts on the well-beings.
Yep.
Perhaps I didn't read it closely enough, but I'm just wondering what is the sort of, and you've also quite helpfully said this is not exacerbated pays. You're not trying to get a dollar for dollar relationship. So what information would you be expecting us to come up with?
The primary data that I think you would need would be congestion in terms of the impact of congestion on the residents and ratepayers. And that's not just congestion on your local roads, but also on the state highway network, which does actually impact the ability of your residents and ratepayers to actually undertake their normal course of activities, whether it be business or residential. So that to me is one, and I think that's the key data. One of the other challenges of Tauranga City is you've got a port, and you're the only council that doesn't have a state highway running to its port. So that's another, but also therefore that actually exacerbates, we're using the wrong word, right? But creates additional impacts because you've got trucks going to and from the port, and those trucks, businesses are actually not based in the city. And so that's actually another impact. So you'd need to do some careful analysis of that. But I think the other issue too is it's also understanding what are the other impacts of other industrial properties, not just related to transportation, but the environmental impacts, etc., that we're now hearing about, etc., as well. I think that's something that the council could actually consider as well for an appropriate differential.
I said Wayne, but could I just follow up on that? So something like a business that's set up here like Winstones, for instance, where we know 87 trips to the port over 3 days every 6 weeks, it would be the impact, not necessarily that they were coming in on a state highway, but the impact that that was having on a specific industry on the population, or the residential population of the city in general. Using, okay.
Just that, and the disproportionate impact of one of that over other commercial businesses, effectively. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I will pose a question, although I think it's totally unfair, and I expect you to say I don't know, because I was going to ask the same question as Bruce: what type of data and the scope of that data? But just but the other part I'm always interested in is timeframes of collection of said data. So depending, but I'll exaggerate the case in your experience. Is it a year, once we land on scope and what? Is it a year? Is it 10 years to collect said data? Have you got any idea how long that would take?
First of all, the first question would be is actually identifying which data you actually want to collect. So that's the first cab off the rank, and there is some data that I think is easily obtainable, but it's actually the first cab off the rank would be actually clearly articulating what data you wanted to collect and then going about that. And I think that's probably collectible in the next year. The only problem is, of course, you'd really want to signal this as part of your long-term plan. So there are probably, and as Paul and Jim have talked about, this is probably a staged approach. So as you get more and more data to support it, you actually set the principles and then you update the information and update the results as you get more and more better and better information, but also as the costs change as well. Because I actually, knowing the city, I see lots of future work that's required. So that to me is actually the ability to actually say, okay, this future work should be paid by a higher proportion by those groups of ratepayers rather than individuals. So I hope that answers your question, but probably not.
I think it's important to know also that that type of information is 1013A, which is your funding needs analysis, which you've also had before, and you've still got some more work to do in that. Having done that stage, 1013B doesn't have to rely on anything in 1013A. Obviously, you don't want to have any perverse or decisions that are just plainly wrong, but you don't have to rely completely on that information if you've got other thoughts about the overall impact on the whole community. And that would be more about analysis of how much each sector pays compared and how much they can afford, that type of thing, rather than just purely the empirical data. You can do that in 1013B.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is a really important discussion, and I'm happy to move the recommendations on that basis, because I think the previous discussion on the previous agenda item clearly demonstrated that our revenue streams will need to be increased to cope with increased costs going forward, just for business as usual. But if you look at the growth in transportation that is expected, particularly the connection from the Waikato to this region, where heavy commercial vehicle traffic volumes are expected to increase by 40% over the next decade. That's an enormous increase. And Add on top of that the expansion of the Tauranga business estate, and we're already experiencing the need to considerably improve the standards of roading in that area to deal with the volume of heavy commercial vehicle traffic that is going through there, quite significant increases in costs. So the reality is the future growth demand will require considerable more investment in the quality and calibre of our transportation system. And we live on a daily basis in congestion in the city as it is now. So we've got, I guess, options to think about whether or not it's a targeted rate, or is it user charges, or is it congestion charging, or by some means or other, we're going to have to increase the revenue to enable us to ensure that the city can continue to invest and support growth into the future. So I think it's vital that we do this analysis. And then the next obvious piece of work is how best do we arrange the charges that are fair? So, for example, I mentioned the 40% increase in heavy commercial vehicles coming across the hill. At the moment, those vehicles make no contribution towards the roading system, other than the destinations that they may be going to may be contributing by way of their commercial rates. But it's a very indirect connection and doesn't clearly link in a fair and transparent way who's creating the investment need and therefore who should be contributing towards funding that. So I think this is a good entree into us clearly understanding who should pay what fair share. And that has been a consistent theme of the Commission since we've been here, and there's a clear need to shift to a more user pays, exacerbator pays, or beneficiary pays, which is the way I prefer to think about it, because the businesses will be benefiting from the use of the services and therefore should be paying their fair share towards that. And then I've just mentioned transportation, but there are wider social and environmental impacts that the community feels from the industrial sector. And it's right and proper that the industrial sector do make the appropriate contribution towards those less tangible but very real costs. If they don't, they will lose their social licence to operate, and that will be at great detriment to the city and to the nation. So it's right, once again, that those costs are identified, measured insofar as we can, and appropriate charges put in place to cover the costs. So I fully support the recommendation.
Yep, I'm happy to second the recommendation. And yeah, it's a really good discussion to have. And as Stephen noted, the Commission have been quite focused on how do we allocate cost, whether it's beneficiaries or exacerbators to the system. I suppose my question really is to staff in terms of next steps and what we need to do and that staging approach. What does that look like from a council point of view in terms of moving towards gathering that information and then setting this in place? I know we can set it in place through the next LTP, but beyond that.
So first step, well, what we would do is bring this back through into the actual LTP process, so through financial strategy, through revenue and financing policy to actually create the ability to do it. And then, as Philip mentioned, it's a focused piece of work on the elements that we would need to actually capture in order to be able to provide that information to actually build that case for that rate. So whether it be, we've got, and Philip's identified already some of them from the financial perspective, but those other social and wider impacts would need to be built up to effectively support what we build into that revenue and financing strategy going forward. But ultimately, it's about looking at equity effectively in terms of what we would do by the creation of that new category and what would be the benefit, what would be the causal factors that we would need to gather that evidence on to support that category.
Good question. What are we voting on? Because we've got an option in pages 39, which is what actually I focused on. When I go to the main recommendations, we don't actually have anything other than just basically receiving the papers, and we recommend we consider the material. Do we need a motion that says, let's, because the recommendation, if I picked it up as one, we include a proposal. Are we actually recommending that we include a proposal so that the work follows on? Or does that just happen under presumably C of the main recommendation on page 35?
So it would happen under C, as we would bring that to establish that within all of our revenue and financial strategy. All of our RTP documents would reflect effectively the development of a category.
So I'm jumping the hurdle too early.
Oh, if you wanted to be more specific, that's
okay. No, it's fine. As long as it's done, that's fine, mate. I'm not worried. I'm happy with that.
Yes, it was my assumption that C picked up the recommendation on page, which is paragraph 39, option 1.
You've got 2 options, haven't you? So you haven't actually specified which option. That's all I'm saying here, Anne, is that actually we have 2 options. One is certainly recommended. And I was just trying to work out what we were actually trying to move. So I agree.
Yeah, I think to make that explicit.
On that.
So in C, you'd recommend council
proceed with investigation of option 1.
Yeah. So introduce a new rating category for industrial properties as part of the draft 24-34 long-term plan. You be happy with that?
Yep.
Which picks up option 1. Second, are happy with that? Staff can organise that. My question was to the staff then, why didn't you pick up Philip's recommendations?
Sorry, just going down to them.
Yeah, it's on our page 47. So he says, so 1 is fine. I just wondered about 2. Was that too specific? Because I thought it was a good start.
Could I offer that if you go for option 1, which is you develop a proposal, presumably you're going to follow through with Phil's recommendations of 1 to 3, because that's the only way you can put the proposal in. You can only act on the decision under the main one of C and to have option 1 by doing what Phil's saying here in his paper on page 47. One follows the other. It has to.
Agree. We could be more specific and include that. That resolution C will give us the ability to capture that information, though, and potential wider implications in that as well. So, that will be built into that category.
Okay. I think I probably asked the same question, but in a different way, because I didn't see it necessarily reflected in the recommendations. Okay. So we have recommend to council to consider introducing a new rating category for industrial properties, option 1, in the development of the 2024-34 long-term plan. Happy with that? You happy with that? My last question, Philip, was in your discussion around the effect of heavy vehicles, you didn't mention buses.
No.
I understand that electric buses are very heavy and very have a wearing effect on our roads, which are in the main local roads.
Believe it or not, actually, council already collects the data on those on the bus routes anyway. So it's data that's already there. When I analysed the data, they were very much aware of the bus routes and also the impact of buses on it. This was actually identifying areas that where we weren't capturing the data.
But that's very good to hear. Thank you. Right. Anything else? While we have Philip here. It's a very good report. Thank you. Very helpful. Okay. So moved by Stephen, seconded by Shad. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much. Page 61. Financial and non-financial reporting. We have a skipped over. Capital program, beg your pardon.
Morena Tato Committee, I'll introduce this this item. Unfortunately, James couldn't be here. Otherwise, he would have introduced the item of the team. The first slide we're going to look at is just a quick look at the recent history, and that's probably the only slide we'll show you that focuses on numbers. So that's just showing the trajectory of our delivery growth over the last few years. And then we're looking at each group who are lined up here that are going to tell us about what they're delivering, and not necessarily in terms of the dollar values, but actually what are the benefits that we are delivering to the community, and also particularly what is locked in by year end. So this is looking forward. It's a big program ahead. Over the last 3 or 4 years, we've spent a lot of time building capability and capacity to be able to deliver these programs. It's been very aspirational. One of the big challenges I think that's ahead of us now is to take the community with us in all that we've got to deliver. And Paul, you eloquently described this as the deliverability, the affordability, but also the disruptability. And I think they're all challenges that are facing us. The social license component of delivering the program that we've got ahead of us is a very big task for us. I feel confident that we've built the organisation to. We've done several restructures over the last 4 or 5 years. We've built it with scalability in mind. And I think we're well dressed to deliver it. But a major challenge for us, other than affordability, which we've talked a lot about this morning already, is that the disruption component, and be able to roll this out in a way that we bring the community with us. Also, it's a very big program ahead. Infrastructure used to be the only gig, and that is now shifting. And that we've got the shift in what we're delivering in terms of amenity and facilities for the community as well. We used to be focused on 3 waters and roading, and not so much roading, because that was a bit of a stop and start, and has been for a long time. Now that's growing really fast. But also simultaneously, we're delivering a lot of facilities, amenities for the community. So that's a really good story for us, and we're going to start with Amanda to tell us about that. But first, we'll have a look at where we've come from. I think this is the only number slide we'll bore you with. So you'll see it's a pretty formidable trajectory from 1920 financial year, where we had a capex of 126 million to this year, or the financial year just gone. It was our intention to break the 300 mark with the summer we had. I think it's been a pretty stunning effort by everyone involved to get to the late 200s, landed at 287. And as you can see, we're not taking the foot off the throttle for the next financial year. So with that as a background, I'll hand over to you, Amanda. Thank you.
Morning. So I'm just going to run through what we've been delivering in spaces and places. The 3 areas I'm going to be looking at is what we're completing, what's going into delivery, and what we're continuing project delivery on for this financial year. So hopefully, fingers crossed, the video plays. So the first up is our Marine Parade Coastal Path. Delivery is going very well on that. We've delivered the first kilometre of the path, and the supporting community amenity is part of that. And we're working towards completion of delivery of that in early 2024. End of the summer. Yeah, the teams are currently at the moment moving into the more technically complex sections of that, with the boardwalk construction through the dune areas. Oh, the video is slow. It works well. When I know. Yeah, the video is slow. There you go. Yeah, speed it up a little bit. Yeah, drag it across. Technology is good when it works. We are not far from Tay Street at the moment, just like I said, going up into the dune areas, which the teams are working on at the moment, where we're constructing a 4-metre wide boardwalk in those sections. There we go. The next project we've got going on at the moment is the shared pathway, which is down in Papamoa, which is another walkway, shared cycleway connection. That's 3 kilometres of path and community amenity that we're installing in this location. The contractor is doing incredibly well on this particular section of project, and that's another project that will be completed in early 2024. Yeah, we're opening these sections because they're long linear projects. We're trying to open them as quickly as we can for people to be able to use them. And last but not least, just skip right to the end if you like. It's easier. The last one is a image, there we go, of the Kopirurira stream. So what you can see in the foreground is actually the completion of the northern alignment, which the civil construction crews have completed this season. There's only one construction season left, which will be starting again in October, which will see us livening that northern alignment of the stream and completing the balance of the planting and the restoration work through that area and the path network. So that's a 3-year project that we will be completing this summer. Yeah, right down to the northern alignment. Yep. Okay, you can flick to the next slide now. There's no more videos. Other projects that are nearing completion that will be completed in this financial year. The Manawa Falls Safe Access project work's proceeding really well there. We're currently just completing the car park and the other supporting amenities at that site, and we're working towards having that open in early 2024 as well. The Destination Skate Park on Hull Road, if you drive past that at the moment, you'll notice a flow bowl starting to emerge from the earthworks. The crews are working really well on that, and currently for zones 1 and 2 we will have that completed in early 2024. We have a couple of funding applications in at the moment. There's a lot of interest in community funders to complete the full design of zones 3 and 4, so if we're successful with those funding rounds, that'll push that completion out to mid-2024. We've got a number of major projects moving into delivery this financial year as well. Up there you can see the current concepts for the Gate Pa and the Maryvale Community Centres, 2 significant community facility projects. Those will be going to market for design and build contracts in the next couple of weeks, and we are working towards being on site for construction for Maryvale in early 2024. We've got the Gordon Spratt Community Sports Pavilion. The design of that's all complete at the moment. We'll be going to market for contractors for that, and we'll be establishing on site in early 2024 for construction of that. And we're also moving into the delivery phase of the Lynx Ave Artificial Turf project, working towards having constructors on site for that in mid-24 as well. We're also continuing with lots of the small good work that we do out in the community that we get really fantastic feedback on. We've got about 60 smaller projects in delivery at the moment, including Keene Reserve Playground, which has just been opened to the public in Welcome Bay in the last month. We've almost completed the Gordon Spratt playground. We're just installing the shade and the landscaping, and we'll be having a community opening for that in September. Moel placemaking will be continuing this year, as well as improvements at the Historic Village, Cemetery, Beachside Holiday Park. We'll also be continuing with our active reserves investment program, which is continuing to upgrade some of the active reserve assets in the city. So that's a continuation of the installation of upgraded sports field lighting, drainage, safety improvements, and cricket nets and other smaller facilities across the city. So busy year ahead. Which one? And that's Gordon Spratt Skate Park. The campus at the top of Moel. Yeah, the completed campus that was open for Matariki. Yeah, yeah. Walk this weekend, yeah.
Right, we'll move on to transport. So if we can go to the next slide. I thought I needed a video. I saw Amanda's video and thought I needed one, so I've put one in. This is slightly different. So we're looking to use artificial intelligence to get a better assessment of our road. So as you can see from there, we effectively video record our roads, and then we've trained the artificial intelligence to look at that video and then map all of those faults as it goes along the road. And as it goes through, you'll see we're recording each of those. We've done some cross checks to make sure that, you know, it is picking up the right information, but we've been working on this for about a year now. And then we can go through and map that across into our system so that we've got a very good analysis of our road network, where our faults are, where our high priority areas, etc. are. So that means with the increased capital expenditure that we've got into the maintenance arena, we're targeting it at the high needs area. I just thought it was worth showing because it's one of those things that's quietly running away in the background, but it will be quite pivotal as we move forward in the next sort of 4 or 5 years. Right, once
the sort of faults you're picking up, because it's too fast to see, but it's potholes, it's where it's.
Yeah, so it's areas where the pavement's got crazing, which is cracking, depressions, potholes. It also picks up anywhere where there's obvious damage, etc., to the pavement as well. So, I mean, we will continue to develop this, but it's being done as a trial to sort of look at how do we use it on the pavement surface at the moment, but then we can take it into other areas as well. Yeah. Next slide, please. So just in terms of, we've got 3 key areas. So in terms of our investment program, we've got 4 large business cases that will be concluded over the next 12 months. So that's 15th Turret, Cameron Road Stage 2, Area B accessible streets, and then we are co-funding the Hewletts Road project with Wakikatahi. So each of those business cases will come to conclusion this calendar year. In terms of the actual construction, again, I've got a couple of photos here. This is projects that people don't often see because it's at the very end of Papamoa. So Te Akaroa Drive, the final, well, not the final stage, the next stage of that in the Sands intersection. So that's the top left photograph. Completion is planned by Christmas in terms of construction. Bottom right is the embankment works for the Papamoa East interchange. So that's effectively the preload. So that will sit there for the next 18 months, allowing for ground settlement. But we're just going through the final stages of the tender evaluation for that project as well. So hopefully later this year, we'll start to kick off construction of the Papamoa East interchange itself. Next slide. So in terms of other construction that we've got underway or are planning, we'll also have Monganui Road. The final stage of Monganui Road is planned to be done in conjunction with Skate Park, and so that will start later this year. But these next series of photographs are what we call our safety program. So we've got approximately 50 projects that we should get into construction by Christmas this year. So we've got 13 local road improvements, 12 walking and cycling improvements, 12 road to zero and 14 school safety upgrades. So The photographs just give you an example of projects that are currently under construction or recently completed. So these are really the ones that the community have put submissions in for that make a real difference to the community and the outcomes for the community. So Poiki Road retaining wall, that's a slip failure that we needed to repair, so that construction is underway at the moment. Kingswood speed humps, that was a request from the community in the last LTP, so that is now complete. Windsor Princess Crossing is a upgrade to improve safety in and around that intersection. If we go to the next slide. We've obviously got our bus shelter rollout program underway, so those are being done. I think we're doing about 8 per month. Carmichael Road Reserve connection, so that allows a safe crossing point across Carmichael Road. Barretta Vale intersection upgrade, and the bottom 2 photographs are St Mary's School. So again, an upgrade outside the school to provide safer crossing points for the kids that go to and from that school. Next slide.
We got really good feedback on that from the principal and some of the parents when we went and talked to the community there.
It does make a big difference. And they're small jobs, but they probably have very high impact. Just another one in terms of blind zone demonstration. Our Travel Safe team have a very active campaign out, working with schools and also with adults now around cycling. Obviously, Totra Street has recently been completed, and over the weekend we've started a major pavement rehabilitation. So we've got a section of road that we're putting in as concrete rather than asphalt, so that's underway at the moment.
I think we all felt that this morning.
I know, it's unfortunate, but the concrete will last us 25 years. If we'd put asphalt in, we'd probably only get 10 years out of it. So it's a slightly longer period for construction because it's 3 to 4 days for it to harden to allow traffic onto it. But it means we're not back in there for another 25 years. Next slide, please. And just the Wairoa cycleway. So that is well advanced now. This is the cycleway as it comes down and under the bridge. But effectively, we hope to have that, I think, complete by October. So traffic signals are to be connected up, and then the rest of it's really just edge marker posts and so forth. So that's progressing well, and that will make a real difference connecting up a Mokoroa through to the city in terms of the cycleway. Thank you.
Good morning, Waters. Go next slide, please. So thought I'd start off with just recognising the considerable sort of interaction with our community through our maintenance contract. We just celebrated 2 years of the Downer, Western Bay and Tauranga City maintenance contract and achieved some major milestones. Obviously, that's the touch point with our community in terms of our services we provide for water, wastewater and stormwater. Next slide, please. There's a picture there of a few faces you recognise. I can see Wally and Kathy. Had a bit of a celebration and recognising some of the contributions some of the staff are making. Next slide, please.
Yeah, I don't like to say it. He had a big birthday on the weekend, but Marty looks quite grey there. Seeing he's not here.
I think it's also important to note that it's a 24/7 working environment for our team. So they are out sometimes all night, and just to make sure our suppliers are operating. So it's a behind the scene type thing. Next slide. Thank you. And one of the other things is around the water meters we put in. So we've actually in the throes of replacing a number of meters on a regular basis, but some of the areas which are hard to get to now have got the capability to get them electronically, so you don't have to walk to every site. So we're putting meters in now, what we call smart meters, which obviously provides more efficient methods of collecting the data. Next slide. Now to some construction. So look, I can't show a video, but I can render a picture of what the Opal pump station, new pump station looked like. It's built, as you can see, there's houses instead of residential. It's an old pump station that's being majorly upgraded. If you go to the next picture, you get a bit of a sense. We tried to give a render there what the pump station looks like, and a bit of a 3D model. And that's most of our construction now. We can produce that type of documentation and sketches before our in-house team to actually get to visualise the maintenance side of things, but also for the general public that won't see a lot of that. As you're well aware, most of our stuff's below ground and not visible. It's just nice to show the amount of work that has to go into producing this. This pump station is critical for future growth for the whole area. So, and again, it's being done in a residential area. Next slide, thank you. Another one, important one is Tautau. We actually have a water main that runs through very unstable ground, so we're actually putting in a second main feed line to feed the community, and that's to give us some resilience. So that hopefully will be finished by the end of the year, and so it's about 2.4 million, but it certainly gives us resilience. Hopefully that means that any breakages we can cover off with sending water in two directions. Thank you. Next slide, thank you. This is our famous bioreactor. So I think I mentioned last time, we have 3,000 piles being constructed to give us a base to build the bioreactor, big concrete tank on top. Successfully, we're 2/3 of the way through. And if we just go to the next couple of slides, you get a bit of a feel for what's being constructed and the piling. So they actually drill a hole and then they actually put concrete in the hole as they're withdrawing the drill out of there, and then you move along and drill another hole alongside. We take some core samples. If you just go to the next slide, you get a bit of feel. We've taken a cross section, so actually that's how close the piles are together. They actually drill 2 piles and then they drill another one in the centre of that. The idea is to give you a structure that will stop liquefaction occurring during an earthquake. So it's like containing cells. But as you can see, the conditions we've had in previous photos, it's not been the best of weather to build these in.
Yeah, we had a visit there, and they were working in sludge. It was literally liquid. It was phenomenal, and you have to take your hats off to the workers, because it must have been really unpleasant day after day to turn up and work in those conditions. But they were keeping going.
Thank you. Next slide. So also alongside that, we're building a new clarifier, slightly different construction, but just to show, if you go to the next slide, please. This gives you again a bit of an arterial perspective of what needs to be built. So the foundations are steel piles this time around, but that will need to be piled in. So that's actually starting as of the 1st of August. It's just started. Just go to the next picture, and you go. All the steel piles are on site. They were bought early on, given the significant issues around trying to secure sufficient materials. So we've got that all on site. A bit of facts around how deep they're going, down 40 metres. But the site itself is not the best of science, but that's what you've got to do for designing. Thank you. And then I just wanted to share this with you. So there are some fun things that a couple of our team have got involved in. The ocean outfall required an investigation to see this ocean pipe it's about 1.5 kilometres off the beach it stops at. The in-house team produced what they call a rove, which is like a robot, remotely operated. If you just go to the next picture, it gets launched off a large boat. It floats down. The divers actually put it into the end of the pipe. And if you just go to the next picture, it actually can do 2 things. It pulled out some large concrete pieces of material it found inside the pipe, which have come out of the joints. It brought those all to the surface, but also allowed them to be able to do a CCTV camera footage right through the pipe. The idea of this is we're trying to ascertain the condition of that pipe. Given the fact that we know it's had some failures at certain points, and that's why some of the cracked joints, the concrete's fallen out. It'll allow us then to figure out how we could actually look to fix that pipe up. So that's a little bit of an exercise. So it's been a worthwhile exercise doing that. Next slide. Now this photo is taken with a CCTV camera. So this is at Fashion Island, and we had to build part of the upgrade of the wastewater was to build a 1.3 kilometre pipe. There's 500 metres of this area that we decided, how could we add some value to our community? So we went out to the community and talked to them about it. We actually built a walkway and mounted the wastewater pipe alongside. And it's got 2 good things. It was easier to build, plus during any seismic activity, you can actually see the pipe. It's not buried. So the public loved that, but one thing we didn't think about, and it came back from the community, was if we're walking down that 500-metre stretch and we've come across some undesirable person coming the other way, what are we going to do? And we went, that's a good point. So actually working with our partners within TCC, we've actually put some CCTV cameras up there and now publicised that fact. So the community are really happy. And again, it was something we didn't think about until afterwards, thinking we're doing a good thing for the community, but their public feedback said, you need to think about this. So that was the end result of it. That's all our slides, I think.
Whereabouts? I'm just trying to think whereabouts that boardwalk is. At the back of Fashion Island, is it?
Yeah.
Goes through Domain.
Yeah, Domain Road through. Back through
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's wide. It's very wide. It's wide enough for 2 mountain bikes to go past.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Te Mārie tātou. Through a combination of sickness and leave, I'm on my own today, so I'll do my best. Just going to cover off recently completed before Christmas, started before Christmas, and then a couple of ongoing projects. Was just stuck to pictures today, and I thought rather than put up the pretty renders of stuff as they're going to be, because we've seen those quite a few times, I thought I took the kids to town yesterday and we jumped on Lime scooters for 2 hours and I drove around the whole town and we took a photo of every single site as it is today, because I'm kind of hoping that by the end of this you'll get a really good feeling of why we are changing some things, because some of them are not that flash. So if we just move on, please, and same again. Yep, so just really quickly, finished the cargo shed relatively recent, open for public use. Next slide. You all know we've finished the railway underpass. So just a bit of grass and greenery to grow. Next slide. But what you might not know is that we've now created that viewing area on the other side. So that is now open, and there was a regular stream of people coming in and out of there yesterday when we were in town, just calling in, having a look, and then popping out again. So
that lighting, the roof lighting in place yet?
I'm not sure if it's in place. I know it's been ordered. Next slide. And I know this one's not quite open yet, but it may as well be. I think sometime later this week, the Dive Crescent North car park is open, so very, very close to be open.
I have to say, Gareth, I'm really proud of this project. I just think the look driving into the city, alongside that, the planting, the design, it is. I think it is something for the city to be very proud of. It's going to be, I know it is a car park, but it's going to be a fabulous car park. More importantly, it's that entrance into the city with the cargo shed and the new Beacon Wharf on the other side. We're now starting to make a statement about you're coming to a really special place.
Yeah, exactly right. And if you actually flick to the next slide, you need to click again. You'll see Strand South car park. So that's one of the projects that we're aiming to have finished before Christmas. But again, if you compare that to the one previous, and that is what people will now see when they drive into the city centre, and you go around the corner and that's what you see, you start to get a feeling for why we're making the changes that we are. Next one, Tunks Reserve. So again, aiming to be finished before Christmas, tracking well at this stage. And then the next one, Elizabeth Street East streetscape. So you can get in and out there for drop off at the moment, can't park, but we're tracking well to have that finished before Christmas. Next one, innocuous piece of land up on Denport Road, 160 to 176 Denport Road, where we're bowling those 3 buildings and putting in 97 car parks. Planning to have that done before Christmas, just working through the tenants winding up their tenancies, but on track at this stage. And then pre-Christmas, a couple of tactical interventions we're doing. So we're doing a bit of editing of Red Square. We currently have 17 park benches in Red Square. I don't know if you knew. You'd have to ask why. So we're doing a bit of editing and a bit of tidying up of that space before Christmas. And the next one, and same in this space just outside the library on Grey Street. So we're going to redo this space before Christmas and reflect the city centre design guidelines in the space, just to give the community a bit of a feel for what that will be like in the future. And then finally, just from a tactical intervention point of view, an innocuous building on Grey Street. This will be end of trip cycle facilities in the next couple of months. So we're putting in 80 bike parks in there, working with Base Station to run it, just to do our bit to support multimodal shift in the city centre. Next slide. Like again, just a couple of projects that we won't have finished, but key parts of the project that we will have finished by Christmas. So the Library Community Hub site, we will have finished detailed design by Christmas. Memorial Park will have finished concept design and costings by Christmas. And 79 Grey Street Laneway, we will have finished concept design and costings prior to Christmas. A couple of other projects that we will have definitely started well before Christmas. The walkway along the waterfront there, which was glorious yesterday when we were out and about, finished construction by March 24. Strand North and Shared Pathway, so again starting construction before Christmas, finished by April 24. Beacon Wharf from the water yesterday looks pretty average, but starting before Christmas, finished by April 24.
See the big geotech
rig,
yeah, off there.
Yep. Masonic Park, starting on the 1st of October, finished by the middle of next year. Closely related to that project, the Art Gallery, starting 1st of October, finished by July next year. Current location of the waterfront playground, starting before Christmas, finished by July next year.
So just with the launch of the art festival, the Crystal Palace is going on in that area that's remaining paved to accommodate that. Is that right?
That's my understanding,
Yeah,
yes.
okay.
Yep. And then the other project we're starting before Christmas, which will be finished in April next year, is the Northern Seawall project. So, a relatively large number of projects either finishing before Christmas or starting before Christmas and finishing by the middle of next year. And then the last two, just to acknowledge that it's not all unicorns and rainbows, there's the Elizabeth Street West streetscape project and laneway, but the exciting news is that we're back on site, scheduled to be finished in February 24. Then I just thought I'd put one in yesterday of the 90 Denport Road site because it was a glorious day and it's pretty cool to see those portals coming out of the ground. So obviously not due in there till the beginning of 25, but Willis Bond and LT McGuinness cracking on at a great rate of knots to get that project moving forward. It's us. I think that was the last slide overall. So collectively, I guess we're up for any questions.
Pretty impressive range of work that's going on, and do want to congratulate the staff. I mean, it is disruptive. Anytime you put anything in place, you have to end up putting road cones out, but I think we are getting that under control and keeping that to a minimum as much as we possibly can. Bruce.
Just want to, well done. This, as an outsider, it's always great to see, and particularly the photos, Gareth, of the sort of the internal part of town getting freshed up. It's great. Nick, I was just wondering whether there was any sort of, at stages in this committee, or even when I was actually before commissioners, we always talked about project management. You learned anything out of this process? Are we going well? Obviously, we've got things under control. Any sort of messages there that you might have around what these great folk are doing around project management and resourcing, etc.?
Yeah, so we have a project underway, which is we benchmarked our project management capability about 2 years ago now, nearly 2 years ago. It was about December. Come December, it'll be 2 years ago, and we gave ourselves 3, and the result of that was pockets of excellence, but also some pockets of some action needed to de-risk the way we deliver projects. What we've done is that we've been on this path of improving our capability and capacity. Capability particularly has been driven by the CPAD division, Capital Program Assurance division, which have rolled out a number of initiatives on how we manage, report, follow best practice, etc. The intention was for us to come back at the 3-year point time and do another measurement of our capability and see how we compared. And the intention was for us to reach best practice basically by that time. We did a sneaky little stock take on that a couple of months ago, and we've definitely improved. We're on a good trajectory. It'll be a tough ask for us to be at best practice by the year end, but we won't miss that target by much. We've got a very definitive schedule of improvement opportunities and things that we are working on in terms of management and reporting and how we do programming, cost control, quality control, all of the project management 101 basic stuff, and also a significant training program that we're rolling out among staff that are in need of it, and I'm happy to be involved with that. So come year end, we'll come back with a report on that. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Look, wonderful. That's amazing. I congratulate everyone. There's obviously a power of work being done around the city, and I think valuable. I can't express how much, having seen all this over the years. A lot not being done. To see all that work being done now is wonderful. I'll probably direct the question at Gareth more so. And I'd be remiss if I didn't, because I've tried to hold council for a number of decades in this. Always challenge them in the sense that, I used to say if you blindfolded someone 20 years ago and dropped them into the city, you wouldn't have a clue where you were from a cultural perspective. You wouldn't know Māori lived here, which we were around. So in all the wonderful projects we see, and the smaller ones, given some of the grand infrastructure projects we've got going on, I'm assuming there's some sort of cultural recognition in all those projects. Like I see the walkway along the waterfronts, and again, not wanting to know the granular details of each project, but I'm sure there's a lens and there's some cultural recognition sort of put across all those projects.
Yeah, good question. Absolutely is the answer to the question. Fundamentally important to the delivery of all of the projects, overlaying that cultural narrative, and with the Te Manawa and Waterfront suite of projects in particular. So there's a cultural advisory group, and then there's also Te Kahui Toi, which is 3 artists that are involved providing specific advice to all of the projects in terms of that cultural overlay and cultural storytelling narrative.
The Dive Crescent car park, there are panels being designed to go back against the fence by the railway that are coming from the design team. So they're donkey deep in it. Stephen and then Rohario.
Thank you, and well done, team. I think if you reflect back on that first graph that shows effectively a 3-fold increase in the capital investment program for the city, achieved in a relatively short time frame of roughly 3 years. That's a remarkable shift. And frankly, the path that the city was on when the commissioners came here was not a great one. We all remember the Hamilton Road car park. We couldn't, through political interference, achieve the delivery of one car park where we've got multiple car parks underway, let alone all of the other investment that's going across the city. That's a step change in investment. And I think you're totally right, Nick, in expressing the need to communicate the story around that. And these pictures are part of that process. But we need to take them out to the community as well. Because I think it's vital that they see what's happening across the city. And these are investments across the city. And they're not just nice to haves, as some of our critics might suggest, but this is core infrastructure that is going into the city. The Three Waters is a clear demonstration of that, but so is the transportation investment. And actually, the social investment and the cultural facilities and amenity are also core infrastructure for a city. And so right across the spectrum, we can see investment not only to catch up on the past, but actually to start to provide growth for the future. Our challenge is now keeping that momentum, and that's why the conversation around how we fund future investment is vital, because if we don't fund it, we'll fall back into that pattern that the city has done of underinvestment, and we will end up paying in so many different ways. So I think there's a very clear link between the presentation we've just had and the discussions we were having earlier in the council meeting of the need to make sure that we are continuing to invest. We're exploring new ways of raising revenue to allow that investment to go ahead, because that will create a virtuous spiral up for the city, instead of a keep it steady, keep the rates low continuously, don't invest, and we end up with all of those other costs of congestion, poor transportation systems, environmental degradation, lack of amenity across the city. So the two are connected, and I think we're on a clear mission here. But it's great to actually take a pause and celebrate what has been achieved and what is being planned. And I underline really to the staff the criticality of both commissioners and staff communicating that right across the community. I mean, I'd actually like, Chair, I'm just wondering if we shouldn't consider a two-page spread in the Bay of Plenty Times or the Sun, showing some of those pictures and just with a story about them, so that people can see what's happening across the city. We have to take the community with us. Otherwise, they won't be prepared to fund the necessary investment. And you can see the opportunities that create themselves by that investment. Thank you.
Kia ora. Stephen just covered my question right there, and did it so eloquently. Yeah, but that was my question. How is this being communicated out to the public? It's great because I think there's a lot of frustration out there at the moment with all the roadworks and everything. And if they had access to the information that you've just presented to us today, that would provide them with a bit of hope that it's not too far away for those projects to be completed. I did have a couple more questions. I know that your team are working, or the council teams are working really hard on getting these projects completed to timeframes. But also, how are we ensuring the health, safety and well-being of the people working on those projects? Like, we heard that some people were working through sludge because of the terrible weather. I'm just thinking about that perception or reputation of the council trying to heavily meet some deadlines and timeframes, but the working conditions aren't very good. So more a question around, are we paying attention to that? And the last question really is around projects we are not on track for. Are there any areas of contention that we need to be aware of in terms of public perception about that, and do we have a response to that if the community are up in arms about those projects? Kia ora.
Well, I can start, and the team can chip in as they see fit. And to your first question on how we communicate this, well, if you leave it to infrastructure, that's not going to happen. We cut a ribbon and we move on. That's not our sweet spot, but it is something that we have become very well aware of over the last couple of years, is the need to work across the organisation and have good comms and engagement. So we're not relying on engineers to do that, but are getting really good assistance and building up that capability and capacity to do exactly that, to communicate. And I think it's an excellent idea to bring some, two-page spread or however we do that. But yeah, I'm not the best person to comment on it, so we leave that to the professionals. In terms of the safety question, as we grow, that is a big issue to us, of course, and we must not compromise safety. So in terms of how we sign up and let contracts, the safety component of how our suppliers tell us about their methodology and how they're going to focus on safety is a really big part of the tender evaluation before we sign them up. And then obviously, as we have meetings on site, we have project management meetings, you know, we do follow up on that as well, but we also have a program of due diligence where the executive, for instance, and senior leaders in the organization go and do site visits and record what we see. And we're very well assisted by our health and safety team in that regard, with blueprints and just how to go about making sure that when we do those site visits that we can focus on the things that could be contentious or risky. So it's difficult to say that we've got all the T's crossed and I's dotted. It's big machinery, it's deep trenches, it's really tricky ground conditions. So one of those things we just must not take our eye off the ball. It's a really serious consideration for us. So I think it's really pertinent that you bring it up, Rohario, and keep us focused on that. Thank you. The last one was on delays, and of course that's a contentious area for us, where we projects sometimes do take a lot longer to deliver than we had expected for a number of reasons. We come across ground conditions. We find pipes in the ground that weren't meant to be there, and those sorts of things. And we do try to prepare as much as we can, but there's also finding that balance about how much investigation and how much do you spend on investigation before you get in to do the physical works proper. And finding that balance is often really difficult. But again, it's back to communication. So it's about setting the right expectations from the beginning, but also be really transparent, I think, about when we find issues that are going to slow us down, that we communicate that really well. And we've certainly taken on board some big learnings, particularly in our transport projects over the last couple of years, which we have ramped up formidably. And last year was the first year that we actually broke the $100 million mark in spend on transport. That comes with disruption and sometimes delays, and we've taken a lot of learnings from that over the last couple of years that will make sure that we communicate and engage and bring the community with us on that. So delays are really, you can't eliminate them. We can try to be better at finding the balance between the investigative work and then doing the work proper. But at the end of the day, there will always be instances where we need to communicate there really well and have our stakeholders understand a balanced expectation, I guess. Anyone else?
Yeah, just on the comms stuff in regards to the city centre, we absolutely great suggestions. We'll take them on board. But we have got a comprehensive comms and media plan for the city centre to tell our story. Just working on the finals of the creatives on that right now. And then the other thing that you'll see over the next couple of weeks start to roll out is our It's On campaign, which is basically all of the hoardings in the city centre and postage and signage start to run out over vacant shops and bits and pieces. So that'll progressively start to roll out starting in the next couple of weeks. I know the first lots at the printers right now. So by the time this committee meets next, you should see visually quite a different city centre, and we will have hit the media on telling some of these good news stories.
I'll come, Shad. I just want to pick up on the media, but I think you're right. I think the wider story, because I know the city centre's got it under control, but I think that wider story is well worthwhile telling. So we should pick that up later. Shad.
Thank you. Just to follow on that theme, and when we think about a $380 million capital program, when it comes to the public, $380 million, where's all that money gone? So it would be useful to link in, Nick's point about $100 million in transport. the public to understand, actually, this is where your money's going, 100 million going into transport. I mean, people will look at Cameron Road and think, well, you know, some of it's gone there, some of it's gone to the Mount, some of it's gone into car parking, but to get visibility around where their rate spend is going, I think would be helpful as well, because, you know, we talk about, well, they talk about, and sometimes we talk about, the soft stuff. I mean, how does that compare? You know, when we're talking about upgrades of parks and playgrounds and walkways, and all of these provide benefit to the community, but in comparison, $100 million or $20 or $30 million towards, I don't know, I'm just saying off the top of my head, the community infrastructure, and then we've got, you know, waters as well. I think for the community to understand, actually, this is where your rates are being spent, I think would be helpful in those conversations, not just in terms of the delivery, but the investment that's being made. Anyway, that's the point that I want to make, but I do have a question for Gareth, just in terms of Dive Crescent. Now, Dive Crescent's been out of action for probably 6 months now, I would think. And then looking at the Strand, most times I've been down there, there is parking available. Now, we're going to close the Strand and then people will migrate through to Dive Crescent. I suppose my question is, are we communicating that to the businesses about that transition and that closure? Because no doubt we are going to hear some noise about the closure of the waterfront, but just making sure that we've kind of got clarity about, you know, we're transitioning from here to here over time. Hamilton Street will come on stream, plus all the other, and I'm probably jumping ahead to, you know, we've got parking later on, but yeah, just in terms of that relationship and communication with the businesses, the commercial sector around the city and downtown Tauranga.
Yes, definitely part of the plan, but I'll just go back and make sure that we're doing that thoroughly.
Sure, Chair. Look, it really is just right back to when Stephen made the comment about comms. I wanted to make the comment, and then because the presentations, the amount of work, in full disclosure, I didn't know half of those projects were going. And I've got a front row seat. And so, you know, that's why I thought it was fantastical, the amount of work going on. I really did not know that's how much was going around the city. So with regards to the city centre, yep, get that all day long. It's a focal point. But to your point, Chair, it probably needs to go wider because there's just so much work going around the place. So just a comment.
Very conscious of the fact that the commercial sector, who have been really supportive of rates increases, which is, you know, quite unusual really, but it was predicated on, yeah, we know we have to pay more, but we want to see some results for it. And what you've presented today is really what we need to present back, particularly to the commercial sector. And I think we should be seeking an opportunity to, through the Chamber of Commerce, which is where we got that message, to just, we don't have to do any more than just present what's in front of us today. I think it was a really good idea, Nick, just to show pictures. There's no figures there. If you go to the Chamber of Commerce, they want some figures along the lines that Shad's talking, but I think that's worthwhile. And then I think we should follow up with the media team, because I'm assuming that you're going to do this on a quarterly basis.
Yeah, well, we're probably thinking that we'll mix it up a bit between the normal, the standard quarterly reporting that we do, which is out of CPAD, and the Power BI reporting on all the numbers and how we're tracking to budgets, etc. But mix it up with this. So what is it we're then delivering? What does it mean to the community, and how does this cater for the growth trajectory, etc.? Because yeah,
I
mixed
agree.
picture.
I agree with Stephen. It is quite outstanding, the change that has been made in by the organisation to go from 120 million in 2021 to what will be 380, 360 in 23-24. And largely credit to the people sitting around the table, actually, who've overseen that massive change in delivery. And it's important that, because alongside that, we have seen significant increase in the rating to pay for it. And so I think it's really important that the community then sees what they're actually getting for it. So we'll take that up with the media team.
And we do have the chamber locked in for the 30th of August. I think it is at a business after 5 event. So we could streamline this presentation and just do it then.
And let's make sure that the videos work, because they're quite impressive. Might have a few more kilometres on the video by that stage. But yeah, I think they will be pleased to see that. I don't think it's interesting to hear Wayne say, even sitting around this table, he had no idea of exactly how much work was going on. So probably most businesses won't either. Bruce.
Could I just put a small plea in for our formal accountability as well? Because we're talking here about, yeah, sorry, not no, I agree. I hear you laugh. And we can have a debate about how much our annual report is reviewed or not. But you're developing a theme of accountability here to the community, and we have, I hate to say it, Paul, the set piece probably well and truly in hand now. But why? Well, I better say, why isn't this? I'm really asking the question, is this part of also what we're proposing to say through our formal accountability documents? Because I think actually it's quite important that there is, if I use the word, our word legacy, that is audited, that is left, that shows what a successful year it's been. Paul, is that something that is that an unfair question to chuck away, mate?
I'm going to say a little bit like Nick, don't leave it to the accountants to write that story either. But our comms team, absolutely, that will be part of the story through our formal documents. Yep.
It's not something I want to over-egg again, but I do think it's actually really important that some of the stuff is actually reflected and is part of the formal record too.
Is that so few of the community actually pick that document up and have a good look through it, isn't it? I mean, it's because it's quite voluminous and but to get some of that flavour in is important. All right. So we have to, well, I don't know, do we receive that report? I haven't got a recommendation, have I?
Just to receive.
Oh, yes, I have. I've got a receive. So Bruce, are you moving that?
Yes, I'm happy to remove the verbal report be received.
Thank you, and Wayne seconding. Thank you very much. I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against, carried. And now we're going to take how many minutes do we have to take? We have to take a break, statutory break.
As long as you like.
10 minutes. What are we? 11:26. We'll take 10 minutes. Comfort break. the meeting. Thank you very much. So that brings us to item 9.4 on page 61, fourth quarter financial and non-financial monitoring. And we have a memorandum tabled that makes some changes. Who's leading off? Who's talking to this? Anybody?
Okay,
Trace.
good morning, everybody.
Trace.
I was expecting Paul to do some introductory comments, but that's fine. It's no problem at all. Firstly, it was good to have that break. Difficult to do a report like this after a extravaganza that we had before, because it's all about the numbers this one. Just to say that on the for the financials part of the report, it's very preliminary. Work is continuing prior to audit in September, and your annual report workshop in September, which will have a more solid set of accounts to discuss. So these draft numbers don't actually hold any surprises. It's very much a continuation of what we've been reporting in recent months. The overall surplus, including asset revenues, is $5 million less than plan. Biggest driver of that is related to Tauranga West. There's that continuing story again, which we've highlighted in yellow on the statement of revenue and expenditure. A couple of things to note. One is a year-end adjustment made to recognise software as a service, which had been budgeted as capital, but we are required again to report as operating expenditure. There will be a resolution coming your way in the near future to loan fund that expenditure of $10 million. One thing I would like to pick up, and it has been reported earlier today, but I'm just really, really impressed by it, which is that kind of equalisation of our over budget interest expenditure with the interest revenue coming back in. That's a really, really good story and a great result from the Treasury team. At this stage, we're expecting that there will be a rates carry forward to future years, but again, that'll be firmed up and reported back to you through the annual report process. So that's from me.
Do you want to deal with the financials first, and then we'll come to Jeremy? Any questions on that? Pretty straightforward. No? Okay, there we are. You got let off lightly. No, in fairness, it's not new. Jeremy, non-financials.
Nor is this new. So the memo that Raj put together, which just corrected something, just turns our 64 achieved to 65 achieved. Sorry about that, Tracy, because I threw into a spin a minute ago, which is what was the change coming. The measures, as usual, are what they are. If there are questions on a particular activity's measures, I suggest you talk to the GMs rather than me, because they'll know the answers better than I will. Just draw your attention to page 78, 79. There were some requests for sort of longer term trend stuff with graphs. So we've started that. If you like that sort of thing, then we can expand that out the next time around. Thumbs up from my right.
I thought it was very good.
Good start.
I thought it was excellent. Being a picture person. Any questions? No? No? No surprises? All right.
Graphs, thank you, and look forward to seeing a lot more of that.
I think reflecting back, so the trend on that, the consents, even though they're processed on time, there is it is quite a significant, and it reinforces what you were saying earlier about the long-term lag and what's ahead of us in the next couple of years, because And that will be reflected in the LTP too, because, you know, some of the early conversations we had was around not putting a huge expenditure into growth infrastructure rather than holding land purchases and planning in order to get through that next 2 or 3 years. It's all part of that story and how we need to manage what's ahead of us.
Yes, Chair, and to that extent, again, it is a story, but there's obviously practicality realities to it. I mean, it's not just a story. And I said to you before, it's the comfort that I'm looking for when I attend these meetings, that when you see data and evidence to this effect, that we've got that covered, because if something, you know, we've got a few plates spinning, you know, we've got fires in the irons in the fire with regards to funding, and if a couple of those fall over, there's things going to happen. Could be potentially a change of government, all the different things that puts things, you know, knocks it off kilter. Then things start to tighten up. So that's the comfort every time I read these numbers, trying to, now I'm not all over the details as much as we're given at these meetings, but it's just a general feeling and trying to keep on top of it. So when I read this information and the reports, that's what I'm looking for, and I will in the short term to make sure that there's comfort there that we're on track.
All right. So Shad, sorry.
Sorry, I did have a question. I was just trying to find it in the papers. Yeah, I mean, I really like the graphs as well. Just being able to follow and see, you know, how we're tracking against those targets. And it's just probably a question of clarification, but the transport one, in terms of the duration of the peak, so at the moment, 461, I assume that's taken into account, well, I don't know, but does it take into account construction? So, you know, we've got a lot of works around the city that would impact on that. Does that take that into account?
It doesn't, it's not adjusted for construction, it is just what it is. So for whatever reason, amount of traffic or construction, or that somebody has ploughed into the median barrier, that's what is measured.
So once these projects come off and transport comes back on stream proper, you'd think that this would adjust, you know, so come more towards the target, I would assume.
No comment, but that's next.
I would have thought that with 100 million plus investment in transport, there will never be a time that there isn't transport disruption.
Yeah, that's a good point, and of course it's not just about the road and transport corridor construction either. There's the mode shift and all of those sort of things which has an impact on it. And the measures here, I'm pretty sure there's an asterisk there. I haven't got it in front of me now, that particular measure, but there's an asterisk in the table that shows which particular roads are included. So it's actually both the state highway network and the local roads that are reported here. So B2B, for instance, will have an impact on these numbers. The impact it has, not just the construction on the highway, but actually the impact it has on the local roading network as well. So there's a sort of a double impact on that. So yeah, both state highway network and local roads included.
Page 80, if you want to find the asterisk. So it's Hewlett's between Aerodrome and Totara, Turret 15th Avenue between Hyrene and Fraser Street, Cameron between 15th and Elizabeth, and Totara between Hull and Hewlett's.
Chair, I do have a question, since Shad's raised that particular graph, the 461. Can anyone recall what the two big peaks were? Was that Bayfair starting, or, I mean, that's a...
Started before that.
Yeah. 18, 19. Massive increase.
Mm.
No.
Don't recall. Okay.
I couldn't tell. Sorry, I would have to look into that. I can figure it out and let you know. Thank you.
Right, would someone like then to move the recommendation that we receive the report with the memo addendum alterations? Wayne and Stephen, thank you. Any further questions, discussion? All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Thanks very much. Resident survey, Jeremy stayed there. Maybe if we had a bit more publicity around our capital program, we might see even more increases.
Again, more of the same sort of theme. This is the annual survey now, so this is done in 4 tranches. We bring the first, second, and third wave to you, and now we've got all 4 waves all together. We've called out 1 or 2 particular responses there, but obviously your attachment has got 50 or 60 pages of detail. Again, we run the process, but not necessarily responsible for the outcomes. They are what they are.
Well, I think there's no surprises there. The first thing is it's good to see that the majority of them are going up, which is what we're all about. It's not surprising to see the overall roads, the satisfaction with overall roads and footpaths when we know that the investment in maintenance of our roads has been woeful over the last 10 years. And the outdoor spaces, A, we know they're short, and B, we know that we suffered over Christmas significantly with overgrown verges and berms, and so it's no surprise that people are still finding that unsatisfactory. However, I have no doubt that we'll see an improvement over the next 6 months. Anyone else got any questions? Comments? It is trending the right way. All right. So we're just receiving the report, but we're also learning from it. Someone like to move that we receive it, Stephen? No? Rosario? Rosario? I've got it in my brain today. It sounds lovely, but it's not as good as Rosario. Okay, it's moved and seconded that we receive that report. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Long-term plan revenue and finance policy framework. Paul, Catherine.
I'll do this again. I'll hand over to Catherine.
Delegating to all the women today, are you, Paul?
No, this is the framework around the long-term plan revenue and financing policy. So it's basically looking at all of our activities effectively and the reasons why we fund them in different directions and so forth. So in particular, the attachment of this paper effectively has the detail of how we're proposing to change, and then I'll hand over to Catherine just to talk through some of the proposed changes.
So the funding needs analysis and revenue and financing policy we've produced for several years, so it's got a similar look and feel, but there's a couple of changes or additional things that have been put in. One is to specifically include in the capital funding, the infrastructure funding and financing more clearly. We did consult on that in the LTPA and just bringing that in more completely, and just some kind of reordering for really of those capital tables to recognise priority of depreciation funding and use of targeted rates. In terms of the operational changes, we are proposing to introduce a flood protection activity. We've talked a bit about that before. With Three Waters reform, there'd still remain some responsibilities within council, and we are they have been described as flood protection in the legislation, and that's what we'd call it. And that is where we would envisage what's currently the stormwater levy reserve sitting, and it would be renamed to remain within there. So that reserve was set up after the Matua floods to help with kind of, repairing or setting up the city better, particularly in those existing areas that are prone to flooding. There is a proposal to look at a targeted rate for private pool inspections. The idea being that we inspect every 3 years and then charge a user fee. If we charged a targeted rate to pool owners, they'd pay a third of it every year. And it wouldn't be, it would sort of, whoever owns a pool through that 3 years is paying a share. There are a few other user fees that have been identified that will be floated as part of the long-term plan user fee discussion on the 21st. And they are, again, in that context of identifying people who are specific beneficiaries to look at options for making sure people pay their fair share. And some of those are listed down there relating to boat ramps, charges for sports fields and parking, which will be discussed a bit more in the parking paper. So if there's any questions.
Thanks, Catherine. Does our earlier decision on an industrial rate, does that have to come in here?
It will come through the reports on the 21st. We are proposing it to be it's sort of incorporated within this policy, and we will propose that would be a specific paper on the 21st.
You're going to say something, Paul? You're going to add in?
No, very, very similar, effectively, that the funding needs analysis will allow targeted rates and differentials to be included. So we'll just make sure that that all flows through, and the financial strategy as well as the other document. These all need to be consistent on.
Any questions on the strategy? Bruce?
In its ignorance on my part, Catherine, rather than anything else, I was just interested in the section dealing with capital funding changes, and I was the second preference after any other money that's come in around the IFF. We're proposing to employ that for other growth that's occurring. Correct? That's where I take it from this. We're saying the funding needs analysis includes infrastructure funding as a second funding preference for new growth. This is in paragraph 17. So it's now becoming our favoured tool of funding after, well, if you go to the funding needs analysis, just any other money that comes in that somebody else has contributed.
Yeah, so not the favoured tool, but it's certainly an option that we continue to explore. And as it says here, it says the second funding preference.
But that means we would use it before we use depreciation or used our own ability to loan funds.
It's a good point that we might just need to just reflect on that wording, because we would still use renewable reserves for the appropriate expenditure, but for new capital expenditure and growth, not so much growth, we use development contributions as well. So we'll just reflect on that wording and need to make sure that's the case. But it certainly is a tool that we use around new capital expenditure.
Mate, look, I wasn't trying to cash out. I was just trying to understand, given you said it was preference, how it was going to operate. So yes, probably with a clarity there makes a wee bit of sense. The other one, Catherine, if it's okay with you, Ian, just to ask my second question. I was interested in the target rate around pool inspections. What's the cost of administering a targeted rate versus having a user fee?
I'm sorry, I can't answer that in dollar terms, but Jim would regard it as relatively efficient rather than having to set up separate invoicing. But
the targeted rate is relatively efficient. Okay, cool. That's what the main key thing I want to know is that, I mean, it's one thing to have good direct relationships, but actually what's the cost of having that relationship? So that's fine. Thanks.
Anything else? All right. So the recommendation is we receive the report and adopt the funding needs analysis, which is in attachment 1 in the attachments, to confirm step 1 of that 2-step funding process and inform the drafting of the policy for consideration on the 21st of August. Shad, happy to move. Thank you. Stephen, second. All right. Happy? Yeah. Okay. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thanks, Catherine. And then we have the long-term plan update, funding and reserves.
So this paper covers off our reserve funding proposals for the long-term plan. Break it into the first segment of it is around depreciation reserves, and what we've seen through asset revaluations in recent times is a significant hike in depreciation, and therefore what we're suggesting through this process is that we balance that over the 10-year plan. So there's some what that means is increased non-funding depreciation in early years, and then that reverses back in latter years. Second is just around some of our unfunded liabilities and weather type liabilities, and bringing in, as affordability allows, funding into those particular liabilities where we have incurred unexpected changes over the year, largely weather type. And then the third part of it is just around our risk reserve funding and the amount of funding we put into risk reserve versus using debt headroom, with the fundamental difference between that being is the intergenerational component of, if it's funded through debt headroom, future generations will pay. If it's funded through risk reserve, there's a contribution through existing ratepayers to risk. So they're the three elements in this one.
Any questions on that policy? I know you've talked us through it. Just on the depreciation, I mean, part of that is inflationary, isn't it? That the valuations, that the jump in valuations have been so dramatic, given past experience, and looking to smooth that seems to make sense. Will we have enough? I'm assuming we've got enough flexibility then to move back if the valuations don't continue to jump high, or am I wrong to assume that?
It's a hard question to answer in that on our existing forecasts of capital capacity, there is sufficient room. However, we know things tend to, history has shown they've moved up. So it will certainly put more pressure on. I think the other thing to note, any dollar that's not funded into a depreciation reserve is effectively a dollar less debt we don't retire in the shorter term. So it is always a corresponding one lever's down, one lever's up. So taking funding less obviously brings our rate number down and makes that more affordable, but it has the corresponding increase of increasing our debt numbers as well.
Yeah, it's not easy. It's not easy. All of which just goes to prove the point of the Future for Local Government report, that actually the funding for local government is broken, isn't it? I mean, particularly for rapidly growing cities like this, where the investment, and apart from the backlog of investment, just that constant business as usual plus preparing for growth, trying to manage growth, the funding system is just wrong. It's just wrong. And central government reaps the benefit of it, and local government pays for it. And there's got to be a change. It's got to go in our briefing to the incoming minister. Need to change the funding system. Okay. Any more on the three issues in front of us in this report? No? You're going to move, are you, Shad? You're happy to move? All right. Wayne, happy to second? I think we haven't got any questions for you. You got any comments you want to make? Yeah? No?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay. I think we've got enormous faith in the team that are managing this, because it does require significant balancing between, as you say, intergenerational debt and what we put on the current ratepayers. All right, I'll put that then. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Item 9.8 on page 109, long-term plan. This is the 24-34 long-term plan, non-financial performance measures changes. Aha. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. So this report proposes some updates to the performance measures included in the long-term plan. These performance measures provide a basis for accountability between the council and the public. And the Local Government Act requires us to choose measures and targets that we believe will enable the public to assess the level of service for major aspects of our groups of activities. We're obliged to include 24 mandatory measures that are set by the Department of Internal Affairs, and those cover 3 waters and transportation. Aside from that, we have a lot of discretion as to what we choose. Tauranga City Council has historically had quite a comprehensive performance management framework with 100 measures included in LTP 2021. And you can compare that to Queenstown, which has 50, Hamilton 61, and Auckland at 81. So this review has sought to sharpen our focus to those measures of interest to the public, as opposed to interesting just to us. Those measures that represent major aspects of our groups of activities, and also those things that are either controllable or highly influenceable by council. The upshot of the review is a reduction in the number of measures in the set from 100 to 80.
We only laughed because it was a very polite way of putting the fact that they had far too many measures. I think we've all had a look at the changes in the appendix. I think you've done a pretty good job. We had a go over it a couple of weeks ago. Yep, Wayne.
Yeah, and that's wonderful. And yes, we all had a giggle. 100 down to 80. Having said that, I still make the comment. If you look, Auckland City Council's 81. We're still sort of around the Auckland number, which I don't know. You'll know more than me, but I'm thinking, well, that's still probably punting pretty high, 80. But I know you've gone through the exercise. You've chopped it back as much as you can at this point in time. So just
I think it's fair to say there's still room for further, potential review of what we already have. One of the things is that we tend to do these exercises activity by activity, and every activity manager is very keen to ensure that aspects of their business are reflected in the long-term plan. There is always a balancing act between getting a very small number of measures that give you a high degree of focus, but maybe don't tell the full story, and telling a very comprehensive story, but then you lose actually what's important in it. So it is a bit of a balancing act, getting the right number.
Rob, I think just to clarify too, Auckland, by the fact it's only got 22 activities, wouldn't include CCOs. So that will be part of the reason for that difference in there too.
I would think the other thing.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So Auckland doesn't have water or transport, and some of those mandatory measures that Rob was talking about are included in there. So that's one of the key reasons why you've got that difference.
I was also going to reflect, and I take your point, Christine, about the substandard CCOs at Auckland, but actually it also just reflects that whether you're Tauranga or Auckland, or dare I say it's Southland, you still face the same general level of activity, it's just in a different form. So, Wayne, I'm not surprised that we aren't particularly lower than Auckland. We do all the same work. And that actually, take your point, you've got to find the right focus, but actually to reflect a reasonable show of performance externally, you're going to have this sort of number.
Stephen.
Yeah, I was one of the champions sitting around this table to see if we could rationalise the number, you may recall. And so I have been involved with the staff in undertaking a review of this, and I'm actually pretty happy with where they've got to. If you take the 14 activity areas, actually there's only about 5 or 6 per activity area, which sounds about right. But what we have looked at and the staff are working on is to take the step back and say, well, if you're a ratepayer, what are the big things that you would expect the city to deliver? And at a high level, the pillars that support our vision are across kind of 6 main areas. So it's to do with transportation, is it delivering or not? Or are our civic amenities up to standard? Or are our environmental outcomes up to standard? So the review has taken a more outcomes-focused kind of process, and we're looking to say, well, okay, within the stuff that we're managing here, what are good metrics that would then paint that picture for a ratepayer as to whether or not we're delivering? And that's a bit of a work in progress. We expect to be able to report back on that. Christine, you would know the time frame.
We would probably look to do some of it through the LTP if we can. So this is the formal sign off, but we've now got that guidance. We've actually had a conversation with Audit New Zealand as to whether we can still meet the statutory requirements, but do it more on that outcome basis. And they, on Thursday last week, said, yes, you can, as long as you're really clear, which is a great breakthrough. So I think we'll work on what that might look like. And our early thinking is that we'll start to report on that frame early in the new year. So maybe sort of end of calendar year first quarter, so that we start reporting it before the LTP measures are in place. We get a bit of a track record prior to the end of the Commissioner's term, and that we can enhance it if we need to prior to finalising the actual LTP final adoption. So that's our current thinking, but we'll do some more work on it.
So the long-term vision is that you have some high-level outcomes that the community would expect, and there'd be some metrics that would measure those. And then that potentially can form that dashboard that I spoke about, I think, probably when I first came here. So that at a high level, this committee could look at that and say, well, are we on trend or not? And that is where the trend line graphing that we saw in the previous agenda item would then reflect what has been the trend over time. What's our goal and what's the trend over time? Are we trending up or down according to our goal? And we think that will provide a much better summary for not only this committee, but actually the wider community to know that their council's on track. So, bit of a work in progress.
And would you still have these measures underneath that? Yeah.
Correct. Yes, so we can still meet our statutory
dive down into a bit more detail. Yeah.
But so you'd end up with kind of and there's actually an illustration that Josh has put together, which is kind of at a strategic level. There'll be a few KPIs. The next level, which is kind of what we're talking about now, would be the outcomes with the sort of key metrics. And then the next layer down would be the kind of the management level. So there'll be a whole tier of each individual manager within the council will have their own KPIs and they'll be monitoring that. But typically they wouldn't be reported up to the committee because they're at a management, performance management kind of level across the organisation.
But they would still be available to the public because
at any time.
Yeah, okay. Because that's quite critical. Most people would only want to read the high level, but there will be those who.
And if you ended up with an area that was trending poorly, then you'd obviously want to dive down into that level of detail and do a bit of a deep dive and monitor that until you're back on track again.
Sounds good. Wayne.
Thank you, Chair. And again, look, I'm probably being more devil's advocate here. So I hear this, streamline number of performances and trying to get that balance. So again, the devil advocate part is I see Hamilton of say similar size to us. Their measures are at 61, and so detail. CJ's mentioned, I don't know how it's structured, but I would then take that with the quarter that's just happened then, that perhaps is Hamilton City not measuring some things? That because they're at 61, we were at 100. So I hear what you were all saying, but so I'm not quite getting it, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I would suspect that they have rationalised what reports at that level a bit more than we have. It's interesting, Hamilton have 12 groups of activities versus our 14, so it kind of depends how you split that. And if you look at Masterton, they only have 8 areas of activity. So obviously the more areas of activity, then the more things you tend to want to measure. So yeah, we're kind of on that. I mean, my hope is that we might have 3 or 4, maybe 5 measures across the 6 key outcomes, which will get you down to about 30, right? And that would be great if we could get there. Better than Hamilton.
Yeah, but also I like the focus on things that we're actually doing or we can actually influence, because too often you get, and there were some things that we had no way of ever influencing, let alone achieving. So it's a work in progress, that's where we're saying. Anything else? So you're happy to move it then, Stephen? Seconder? Bruce, thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Right, thank you, Josh. Rob, sorry. I'm having trouble with names today. Obviously, I called you, Coral. So it's just, I had a busy weekend. So we're on to parking. I think I definitely know we've got Reese and Brendan. Not quite sure which way it's round.
By way of introduction, over the last 18 months, we've approved the parking strategy and the parking implementation plan. Commission over the last couple of months have challenged us with, in terms of things are changing over time, and with all the activity that's going on at the city centre, the cost of living, availability of parking, and availability of alternatives. Have we got it right? According to the original implementation plan, we were going to go with timed parking to 11th Ave by November. And that could provide a challenge. So we've looked at a few options, and the purpose of this paper is to present where we've landed on what we think is a balanced approach to the rollout of the paid and particularly timed parking implementation for the city centre to Papa Peninsula. So I'll hand over to Brendan and Reese.
I'm more than happy to hand parking across to Reese, so I'll let Reese just talk through his report, and happy to take questions at the end if there's any.
Afternoon, everybody. So it's pretty straightforward. I'll expect it as read for the most part, because parking's everybody's favourite topic. It's pretty straightforward. Since we've put through the changes of rates in the city centre, we've actually seen a bit of a change in how people use the city centre for parking. So during what I like to call the dark old days of the trial with the 120 minutes, you had people using the parking all day but not staying in the same spot for very long. So it was just a constant merry-go-round as people moved around throughout the day to maintain their spot. Now we've managed to move that to a majority usage between the 0 and 2 hour mark when it comes to people using the parking in the city. There's a pretty good graph there in terms of time for how often people pay for. You don't need to worry about the numbers except for the ones at the bottom, which is this one here. And it just outlines the sort of the time, the blocks of time people are paying for when they park in the city.
If I can just interrupt, the trouble with those two graphs is, I don't know about anyone else, but I couldn't read what the colours stood for. So
don't worry about the colours. Focus on the main amount. The colours account for the ways people pay. It's more of just it's more for my benefit when I'm looking at the data as well, to see how many of our customers are paying by cash, how many are paying by app or phone, and how many are paying by machine. The main focus is just the amounts of transactions in this case, and the amount of time that they're paying for. The colours on the bars are just how they pay for that transaction. I do apologise for that. I just ripped it straight out of the system.
Yes.
The other one of note is the slightly more complicated looking one from the 1st of June that monitors the amount of transactions throughout the week. And there's actually a little bit of interest there for the parking nerds like myself, and the fact that a majority of our parkers are coming in on that Wednesday and Thursday. So when everybody's, in this current environment with more flexible working arrangements, everybody's decided to come in on the same 2 days. So a potential thing far out in the future is figuring out a way to influence people to sort of be a bit more consistent in the time that they pick throughout the week. But cast your mind back to last year in October, and we agreed on the council agreed on a whole bunch of changes to extend paid parking in the city centre into what's called the city centre fringe, which is outlined in that map in the background, and included a swath of time restrictions right out to 11th Ave. The original reasoning for that is still sound. It's something that we need to do and we need to get to eventually. I'm just proposing that potentially doing it all at once from 1st of November this year might just cause a little bit of friction, so shall we say. So something that we can do to sort of let us adjust as time goes by is sort of stagger that rollout. The importance for that as well is, as Gareth mentioned, there's a lot of projects going on in the city. There's a lot of road cones in the ground, which is a good thing. It shows people are spending money and doing things. But it means that the parking network, if you will, is going to be constantly changing over the next 18 months. As new buildings turn up, car parks that people are used to using every day disappear. That sort of how people behave and where they go is quite fluid, and we need to sort of be prepared and ready to react to that as we need to. So having that sort of staggered approach allows us, if something enormous changes in the city, we get some sort of really heavy impact, we can adjust as we need to as we go through.
So, and the other thing we've seen the occupancy in that CBD remain reasonably. We haven't seen that expand as we had originally thought that it might.
Yeah,
by this time.
And that's a really interesting thing to see, is we've seen a real squeeze on occupancy in the city fringe, sort of just where that free parking area meets our paid parking city centre. But the occupancy in the city centre has been pretty good, actually, below what I would consider my own KPIs when it comes to managing parking. I would expect an average peak occupancy of 85%. That's a target for me on the side of the road. Takes a little bit of getting used to, because you have to get used to the fact that seeing lots of cars on the side of the road and not being able to park directly in front of the store that you're intending to, maybe going 2, 3, 4, 5 parking spaces down. But it's all about an efficient use of space as well. So we don't have, we don't turn the city centre into a car park that's only full on a Wednesday and a Thursday. So it's just managing that usage.
So where, along with this, where are we getting to with reserved parking?
So you referencing the lease structure changes in the buildings that we did? So that those have gone through as of the 1st of this month, August, yes. Sorry, it's been a bit of a blur since I started in Feb. And it's been really good. So we've seen the changes that we expect. Quite a few businesses it's the type of thing where if I was still wearing my private sector hat, I might have got in trouble for doing such a change, but it works out well for us in the public sector because people are rethinking why they have those reserve bays in the parking buildings. We've had a lot of businesses go, oh, actually, we don't need to pay for those and keep them there, because if your staff are only, like when you see the fluctuations we get throughout the week when staff are turning up and using their offices, if they're only using those spaces 2 days a week, it's actually probably cheaper for them just to pay the casual rate a couple of days a week. And it means those spaces are free for us, for people coming in over the free weekends. So people visiting the city, they know that the space is available. And people who on the spur of the moment maybe don't have a regular plan for coming into the city, but decide that they want to. So it just frees up those spaces for them as well.
And you're showing those on those boards coming in to the city, which is tremendous. It's really good to see. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions for Stephen?
Yeah, well, I think there's thank you very much for the report, because I think there's a lot of learnings that we can take from it. The most significant of which is it really challenges the perception that there is no car parking in the city centre if you want to come and shop. Because, and I think that picture on what page we are, 117 of our agenda, which shows on that day 203 car parks available in the Elizabeth Street car park, 40 in Spring Street and 70 on Cliff Road. And since we've been having this conversation, I've been making a bit of a point to have a look at the sign that I pass every day, which is down on Dive Crescent, and consistently those sorts of large numbers exist. And yet it almost guarantees that if I spoke to a long-term resident in the city and said that, they would think I was telling porkies. But actually, there are a lot of parks in the city, and 50 to 60% on-street occupancy for city centre means that there's roughly 50 to 40% available at any given time. It might not be as it is for Ashburton, where I live right outside the shop that you're going to, but it will be pretty close to it. And where I used to live in Auckland, having any car park in the city at any price was always a challenge. So we've kind of, I think, probably got the balance about right, though, as you say, it would be good to get even higher occupancy and still have enough capacity to allow people to come in. Our big challenge is clearly, the other thing it tells us is our big challenge is clearly all-day workers and where they park. And if we continue to allow free parking in the city, then we'll continue to allow all-day workers to park there, and then the people who come to the shops that the people are working at won't be able to find a park to do business, and that'll kill the business. So it is a delicate balance of that we have to tread, and it's great to have the level of expertise that you're bringing to the job, and thank you for that, and to make sure that we get the balance right. I think it is right that we stagger the change, and so happy to move the recommendations, Chair, but I also think it's critical. One of the risks that's been noted there is the risk of people getting confused about what's going on. So once again, the onus comes back on our ability to communicate the change. And I don't know if there's a plan in place. If there is, it would be great to have a bit of a sense of that, or will there be a plan in place to make sure that the change is progressively communicated? Because, I mean, what we've learned out of this is that our communication to date about the availability of car parks is not there. So we need to do more, both to communicate there are parks available, but that the context is changing as well.
Yes, we are doing that. It was actually a big part of, one of the first things that we started working on when I started working for Tauranga City Council. So I owe the comms team a lot of coffees. We have regular meetings, and we're working on getting that dialogue back with the public in terms of what's happening. You may see whenever there's a parking related post on social media or whatever from us to the public, there's a certain response that comes through. And we're hoping once we build that regular dialogue, you'll start to see some of the bite come out of it, because people don't always have the opportunity to say what they feel to us directly about what's happening parking wise. And if you have that regular communication, you ease it out a little bit over time. So it helps us in more way than one.
As well as forgetting names today, my batteries are dead. In more ways than one. Along with that is the fact that the new bus services are still not in place. So I've lost track of, are we able to get workers in by 8 o'clock in the morning? Do we know?
So my understanding is the last of the bus services will be September. So I think about 80% of the bus routes are now back at full schedule, and it's just the last couple of lines that are still to be done. So predominantly, yes, you can get in by 8 o'clock. So those earlier morning services are back on schedule.
So again, that's important, along with parking changes, that people understand the alternatives to coming into town. Because I do think we need to recognise that parking for workers is expensive if you're paying every day. And so we've talked about those good alternatives using public transport. We're opening a cycle. I heard from Gareth. We're opening an end of cycleway facility. So hand in hand, the parking changes help that. And I know that local government is talking to both sides of the spectrum about the ability to manage our own parking fines. Because at the moment, most people don't understand the government sets what those parking fines can be. And that gets a bit ludicrous when the fines aren't enough to cover an all-day park as against paying for it, as against not paying for it and being fined. So we need to be able to control that ourselves in order to help with all of this. So it's many prongs going towards this. So I think staging it makes perfect sense because we need to make sure that people do have legitimate options. Anything else? Shad?
Just a quick question in terms of the charging. When we get to that point of putting in meters up to 3rd Avenue, would that be consistent with metering across the city, like how we've currently got it?
Yep, sure will. It tends to be about simplicity. Like parking's a bit of a grudge purchase, as I'm sure we're all aware. And a lot of the sort of feedback that we get from the public is the confusion over parking in different areas. So we're just sort of trying to keep it simple for the time being.
And then the time limited parking all the way through to 11th Ave, will that be consistent as well? Or will there be variations through that part of the city?
Yeah, so we're leaving that right up till last. You might have noticed in my recommendation, there's a bit of discussion that needs to go around time limited parking, and it actually ties into the earlier point about the Land Transport Act with the breach notices. When you're dealing with time limited parking, health and safety incidences for our parking wardens on the ground goes up, aggro increases, for lack of a better term, and you start to notice that in the feedback that you get from the public. And we don't know exactly why. The theory at the moment that I'm running with is with parking, with paid parking, you're paying for a service. You know what you're getting, you know what the price should be, even if you say you don't sometimes. With time limited parking, you feel like it should be free. So when you get that parking ticket for going over the 2 hours, you just lose your rag because now you feel like you're getting a fine for something that had no cost associated with it, as opposed to having that cost. So we just got to be careful in how we apply that, because the lower rates for time limited parking as well, it's generally between $12 and $15 for the parking fines for time limits nowadays, sort of make it cost us money to enforce time limits, which shouldn't work that way, but it's the nature of the Land Transport Act currently.
I'm happy to move. And I support the rollout. I mean, the progression of the rollout over the next 12 months. Over the next period or so.
Stephen's moved, so you're happy to second? Sorry. Yep, sorry. Any further discussion on that? So I'm reluctant to sort of pull back altogether, but I do think we need to be sensible because there aren't the alternatives. And the only other question I would have, Gareth, is we assume we're getting something soon on construction workers' parking facilities.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Reece can probably talk to Marine Precinct.
It's not quite ready for public.
Okay, yeah, but there is something coming on.
We are working on options for that lower cost, maybe a little bit further out for the influx of workers that are inbound.
And we do notice some of the construction sites in the city centre at the moment are using the sites themselves to park trade vehicles rather than having them on the road. So that's working quite well, as much as they can.
All right, so it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried, thank you. Thank you. Street use policy. Nick and Vicky. And Brendan.
I'm Warren.
Oh, okay.
We expected parking to take a little longer, so I think he's en route. Thank you, everybody. Kia ora koutou. I'm Vicky Grant-Usher. I'm in the policy team. We've been working through a number of our older policies, and today we're bringing you 4 existing policies from the early 2000s that we're looking to modernise and merge into one. The policies deal with the lease and licensing of streets, as well as other activities such as planting and parking on berms. Because the policies are a little older, they're lacking kind of a principle structure. So we're planning to put in some principles in the policies, similar to the city vision and drawing on our street use design guidelines as well. We are wanting to recheck our rationale for charging for street dining and balcony dining. The position was from the early 2000s, and we're just wanting to check in whether it's the right approach for now. We're proposing that moving to a zoned parking charge may be more a zoned street dining charge may be more appropriate. We have a number of compliance issues with the use of streets, and we're proposing some changes to improve compliance in terms of increasing application fees that are more reflective of the actual cost, as well as asking for bonds where something is a commercial or private use of the street. And in one case, we are reducing our compliance or recommending to in terms of verandas and design features where we have approved them, but they're not required under the city plan, just to align with what we do for those that are required under the city plan. We've noted some issues with accessibility due to street dining, and we're proposing as a first step a working group process with Main Street's businesses, disability representatives to try and improve that as a first step. And then there are some other minor matters where we are seeking to clarify in terms of the aesthetics of street dining, whether smoke or vape-free requirements should be attached to street dining, some further information on relocating vehicle crossings when that comes up, and also artificial grass. Take any questions.
Okay. I've got a number. But I think it's a really good piece of work, because I know that in discussions, particularly with some of our CBD hospos who are really struggling because of construction, because of post-COVID, and because of in the wet weather, they have been complaining that it's not fair that some get charged and some doesn't. So it's really good that we're looking to get fairness across the city. I guess my question really is around your zoning and what it is that you're thinking about for zoning.
And I think there's some questions too around phasing as well as part of this. So I think today we're looking for a steer in terms of, do you have an appetite for maybe relooking at this? And then from there, kind of developing up a bit of an implementation plan in terms of, because there's choices around whether you do it on a street level or more of a suburb level. Because we're a smaller centre, it might be that streets are more appropriate. Places like Auckland do it on a suburb level rather than a street. And then also how we transition from the current set up into a kind of zoned fee, whether we'd want to phase that over several years, or so there's a few choices to make in terms of how you'd actually implement the policy position. I guess today we're just getting a steer in terms of whether we feel that a zoned charge would be one that you'd like to pursue, and then we can come back with more options there.
I think because there is a balance, isn't there? And you make it in your report. You are actually giving some businesses extra space to get revenue from, which are public spaces that the public pay for, and you've got, but then they do give vitality and life. And we've got the weather for it. I mean, it always amazes me that Wellington has street dining, because who would sit out in the street in Wellington weather? I'll get shot by Wellington
quite low
people.
fees.
But compared to Tauranga, so how do you balance that? So and is it different in the CBD from maybe in Greaton? So that's what I'm pleased to hear you thinking about, because there's no doubt in the centre city or the centre of the Mount is quite different from a coffee bar in Greaton. So I'm assuming you're talking about those sorts of zones.
Yes, and there's probably a choice in terms of whether you want to do outer suburbs or just keep it at free. We've heard from the Main Street Association in Greaton that outdoor dining is really important for them from a safety perspective. It helps give kind of people a sense that there's passive surveillance, and so they'd be really interested in keeping low or free in that area just for the safety aspect.
My other question then was about artificial turf on berms. What's wrong with that? Saves mowing.
It does. So it's more the possibility of, I guess, microplastics entering the environment, and also just to do with kind of the permeability of it. Obviously, grass is superior in terms of stormwater, planting perhaps even more so than the grass. So just looking where people aren't able to maybe maintain a lawn, we talk to them around other options in terms of support for mowing through like MSD, or also whether planting might be a more appropriate non kind of upkeep option. So just trying to clarify that in the policy rather than on an ad hoc basis when people inquire.
That's fine.
I was going to say, I think one of the things with artificial grass is its life is quite limited. Depending on who the supplier is, it's anywhere from 2 to about 10 years. And then it needs to go to landfill. So it is quite a wasteful product in terms of that constant renewal. It's not a put it in once and that's fine. It's low quality as every couple of years. Also, less of an issue now, but if someone drops a cigarette or anything on it, it will actually melt. So yeah, it does degrade pretty quickly over time.
I was just conscious that Bill Wasley had sent through some comments on this, which are much in line, I think, with what you're proposing. But he did raise the preference for the CBD to be sticking to the design guidelines where we've got
the public
design
realm
guidelines.
ones. Yes, so the public realm guidelines definitely will be taken into account in terms of that. They don't go to the level of street dining for private businesses, so but there's definitely the intention that those two documents talk to each other, but also recognising that it would be good to have a guide that would work across the city too as it grows. So definitely trying to balance those two things in terms of that.
There is a safety issue around the actual quality of the furniture, isn't there?
Mm-hmm.
That we would want to make sure that we were maintaining. Yeah. Okay, that's my questions. Rohario.
Kia ora. I've just got a couple of questions. One of them is similar to what Wayne was talking about earlier around the if we're looking at the aesthetics, is there any I suppose tangata whenua involvement in the design of that? I looked at some of the groups and I didn't see tangata whenua in there, but I suppose if you've said there's the public realm guidelines, and if tangata whenua haven't put it into that, that might be the answer to my question. But that's what I came up with when I read the papers over the weekend. And my second question is really around seeking clarification around balcony dining. I'm just not sure how that works, because in my head it's a balcony, it's not impacting the flow of traffic underneath it. So when we're looking at charging a fee, would that be the same as cafes which are actually blocking the pathway for access? So those are my two questions. Kia ora. Yes, definitely. In terms of mana whenua involvement, again, mirroring the public realm guidelines, that would be part of that design process at the outset, yes. In terms of the balcony dining, yes, there is that difference in the sense of not necessarily having the same disbenefits as street dining in terms of pedestrian flow, depending on the design and where the structures sit. So definitely you could choose to take a different view for balcony dining in terms of the, I guess, the cost to the public versus the benefits. Noting though as well, I guess there are some kind of street impacts in terms of kind of closing in the street and the visual elements as opposed to the kind of direct obstruction. So it is kind of open, I guess, a judgment call in terms of whether due to the kind of nature of it, you'd prefer to have a different charge. We just found that generally, you know, in terms of the commercial benefit that's being received, it's very similar to street dining. And so therefore we felt that it would make sense to kind of reflect that as well.
So one thing with balcony dining is flexibility in the future. So often with any structure, what we don't want to do is have a building that has a permanent connection. So if, for instance, in the future we needed to use that road space, that there's significant cost to alter the building. So with balcony dining, if it's a veranda, etc., it can be removed from a building pretty easily. But as soon as you have people sitting on it, the structure gets quite large. So as a result, they tend to need poles or whatever sitting in the road space. So it's just an extra consideration so that we're not locked for the life of that building if we ever needed to use that space in the future.
I mean, I can understand that, but I'm a bit with Rohario. The building owners themselves would be providing that platform as against the public ratepayers providing the street. So I understand you want to have control over when and where and how to be safe, etc. But to charge for it, then it seems to me that's a private cost.
I think effectively what you're doing is you're charging for the airspace, which is quite a normal commercial transaction. And I think thinking back to the earlier conversation when you were talking about the funding of the council and trying to find other ways to ensure that people who benefit pay, it actually comes back to that principle that there's a private benefit, and to what extent do you want that? And that is, they're all policy trade-off decisions, and that's why they will come to you for direction. But I think that's some of the thinking that sits behind the alternative view.
Pretty mean though, isn't it?
Is similar examples, commercial airspace, will we charge?
We do under the policy, yeah.
We do in other parts of the city.
For what? Yeah. What? How?
So
the balconies or
valuation. So it's got a market value, yeah. So generally we won't allow like private developments to use the airspace unless there's an exceptional circumstance. But where there is kind of justification, then they get charged a commercial rate. Yeah.
Just we also don't have to, even though it might be in the policy, just like we've suggested, we don't have to charge for it now. If the circumstances in the city centre, for example, where we feel like it's in duress for a period of time because of construction, we can have it in the policy, but it can be something that we turn our eye to at some point in the future.
Being mischievous, Chair, because of course our ears perk mana whenua, tangata whenua, because we caught it all quite a lot about airspace and the charging of same in certain circumstances. So we'll watch that with interest, see how that progresses.
So have we given you enough direction? I think we all agree with the policy principles. Not a problem with that. And I'm sensing around the table we want to eradicate inconsistent charging. Yeah. We certainly want to cover costs and have that ability to have some discretion. We certainly want it to be accessible. And what about smoke-free and vape-free? Smoke-free and vape-free. Certainly as someone who enjoys sitting outside having a cup of coffee, I hate it when there's people smoking next to me. No. I haven't smoked since the 14th of February, 1986. Don't intend to start. Yeah. Who would police that?
So it would be a condition of the license
The
agreement.
license.
So yeah, any complaints in terms of that we would monitor and then take into the kind of, I guess, the decisions on the lease or license. It would be fed back to the venue if there were complaints. Yeah.
Have you had discussions with the Main Street?
So Mount Main Street are quite supportive of a change, especially I guess in the vape sense. They're quite concerned in terms of the proliferation of vape stores, particularly. But they did also mention that kind of the smoke-free and vape-free policies would be something they would be supportive of. In terms of the actual businesses themselves, we haven't talked to them directly yet, so potentially could have a different reaction in terms of the ones for whom it's kind of part of their business, I guess.
But we are supposed to be heading for smoke-free 2025, aren't we? Yeah. I mean, I'm very supportive of it. Anything else that, Rohario?
Just a question on the smoke-free and vape-free. So that's just for street dining. I'm thinking if there's nightclubs and patrons wanting to go outside for a smoke and vape, that's still, I'm thinking about it in terms of irritated people who, drink and smoke at the same time. I think that's something we'll need to check in with the businesses around how it would affect, especially like security late night and like whether it's still within their premises. So it's definitely one where we would want to get some feedback from the businesses about how that would affect, because definitely we wouldn't want to be putting people in unsafe situations if they were to leave a premises in order to.
All right. Someone prepared to move? Stephen? Seconder? Shad? So this will come back to us again?
Correct. And would you like some more options on balcony dining at that stage? I think get the feeling that it wasn't.
Not universally accepted. Unsure. Let's have a look at it. All right. Nothing else? All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Water services reform update, I see, and we'll break for lunch. Is this our last one? Yeah, let's keep going till 1.
Hopefully this won't delay us too much. So to wrap up where the water reform is at the moment, probably one word of uncertainty and until after the election at least, but there is a lot going on. And we particularly wanted to report back on Bill number 4, which was the legislative reset from 4 to 10 entities, for which we got a submission in at a flick of a lamb's tail, I think. That was a pretty short submission time, record short, I think, and very pleased to get a submission together with Tauranga Pū. Very appreciative of the cooperation and collaboration, and that was a fantastic piece of work. So thank you very much for that. Kia ora. And obviously the NTU, is the National Transition Unit, is live and going and doing a lot of work around it. There's a lot of data and information gathering, particularly around stormwater, still going on. And the intent of the current legislation is, of course, still there. So although there's a big reset, there's a lot of uncertainty. We can't take our foot off the throttle. So in terms of an update now, I'll hand you over to Diane and Kathy, who are very close to this.
Kia ora katoa, I'm Kathy and I work with the City Waters team. Yes, just building on what Nick's just advised, the legislation work that we're doing is just ongoing, so we do it piece by piece. The timeframes are always very tight, but one thing that I would like to also reiterate is that we have a very strong relationship with the Tauranga Pū. And we highly value that relationship and continue to work. So that's very evident as the submissions we've been putting back on those legislations have been signed off by both Anne and Matari. So thank you. The change in one thing that's significant for us now with the reset is that the change in the transition approach has gone from a very government-centric, DIA-heavy direction to more regional-centric, where we're making a lot more of our own calls and a lot more of our own decisions. There's been a bit of a negative spin on that one in terms of timeframes. We're finding that it's taking a lot longer to get ourselves organised because everyone's around the table trying to make those decisions as we go. Having said that, we've got a strong relationship with Vaughan Payne, who was appointed as the Chief Executive for Entity B, which is no more. We've got an Entity B, C and D underway now, and he's overseeing all three of those entities and working very hard to form a lot of relationships right across through the Waikato and Bay of Plenty. What we're trying to do at the moment is influence the 6 Bay of Plenty councils to keep ourselves warm, and which is what Nick was saying. We're finding if we're not trying to keep our foot on the accelerator in TCC, trying to show a bit of leadership in that space, and with Vaughan's guidance, we're trying to do motivate a piece of work to be done within the Bay of Plenty councils, and that's around a readiness assessment. So what we're trying to do is ensure that any investment that we're making in terms of our time and our contractors' time is around no regrets. And so we're not regretting that we invest in our time and energy. There's 2 work streams with the National Transition Unit that are still going, flat to the floorboards, and that's the people and workforce work stream and also the data and digital work stream. So we're quite involved in that data and digital space. We're very fortunate we've got some strong relationships there, and what we're trying to do is sort of provide some influence into the way things are being built. At the moment, all the focus is on Entity A and the Auckland councils, and what we're trying to do is ensure that what's built for them will actually suit us when it comes down the chain. But we could be looking in to try and keep this holding pattern going now for about 2 years at the most. That would be from a go live date, but you'd be putting in a lot of work 15 to 18 months before a go live date is announced. So that's our next big key decision. One is a go live date will be communicated to us, where the NTU is making the call on what the sequencing will be for all of the entities. And number 2 is going to be central government elections. So it's very much a watch this space at the moment for us.
Kathy, so there's one outstanding issue from the legislative process, which is the SOP on giving whatever entity it is. I don't know. I've lost track whether it's B, C, D. We see the same powers as council. Is that right? To take land
land, but to do work on private land.
Work on private land.
Yeah, it's so that supplementary order paper was about us not losing the current capability that we have under the LGA. So we're very disadvantaged with this new legislation. So that's quite imperative that we get that through, and that's going to be on your desk in the morning for
I've got it here, for making a phone call.
Yeah. So
I think the suggestion is that we try and get that SOP to the minister, so that in the committee of the whole house. So I guess I've got to try and convince the minister that this is absolutely essential. And so it's a small change to the legislation that we're relying on him to make. I think we should be also getting our local MPs, well, even though they're the opposition, but to support it, to understand it and support
it. Yes, they might not support it given they're on the other side of the house, but yeah, I think we need to be influential with our current relationships with Minister McNulty, I think.
And also, there's been a number of other councils that have shown some interest in supporting this change as well in terms of the supplementary order paper. So as soon as you've had that conversation, we'll then widen that conversation to those other councils. Thank you.
Okay, all right. So basically, it's just recommendations there. Noting retrospectively, I think the staff did a fantastic, because you only had a couple of weeks to turn that submission around. So it's acknowledging that joint submission in retrospect, and it's good that we've got Tauranga still alongside of us. And then endorsing the next steps. Someone like to move that? Continues, Bruce, Wayne, thank you. Any further discussion? The uncertainty that's the issue. I think the only, in talking with both the opposition and government, the essential points where they agree is waters have to be financially sustainable, and we've got to meet the standards. How we do that is different depending who you talk to. So, okay, all those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much. Health and safety, Alistair.
Just while Darren's coming up to join us, there's probably two things to concentrate on today. One would be, Rohario, you raised the question of when we deliver capital works projects, how do we ensure people are safe? And so, Darren, you might want to talk to that. But I think the other, of course, is you do see a correlation between cost of living crisis and the number of social challenges that are intersecting the council. So we should see that in the data come through as well.
Thank you. Just further to that though, I read and watch with interest. So I have full confidence, council, you've got things in check and you monitor that. But a lot of your capital projects, you're getting in contractors and subcontractors. So, you know, when you're going to projects and you're seeing people in the mud and doing their thing, you know, so that comes down to what sort of relation and what measures you take with the contract with those businesses. So maybe I'd like to hear that too, because I'm quite sure council puts in place the needed and necessary policies, but how do you hold your subcontractors and contracts to account in that space?
Nick, after Darren's walked us through the report, perhaps you and I can close off any further questions. Yep.
Yeah, kia ora everybody. I won't hold you up for too much. I know lunch is beckoning, so all good. So thanks, Alistair. So I guess just to answer your question on the due diligence, we've just finished our contractor management standard and our risk standard as part of that 45,001 journey that I've been sharing over the last few months. And with that, it's a real good, clear guidelines on and a supporting tool for our project managers, our contract managers, on how from initial stage planning, etc., on due diligence expectations, safety and design, all those minimum requirements that our contractors need to abide by under the Health and Safety at Work Act, right through to our review and monitor piece. So due diligence for our GMs and senior leaders, as well as our my health and safety business partners. They support the project managers out on site or internally with it, you know, within a desk-based role, to ensure that we're looking at our critical risks that are involved in those key projects. So we've got 13 critical risks, ensuring that they're being managed with the right control measures in place, that meeting our minimum standards. And then obviously we don't inherit the contractors' risks. We have a Section 34 where we have to coordinate and collaborate with them, and obviously share our known risks when they receive the job and undertake the work for us. And then our due diligence process is obviously that monitoring and reviewing, working with them. So I think that, you know, we've got some real clear guidelines, and that 45,001 is helping our team. And we've got some training happening starting at the end of the month as well for all our project managers to get them up to speed with that. Awesome. Cool. So I'll touch on the report quickly. So just on the back of our audit items that were still open from 2019, good news is that we've got a couple of long outstanding ones that we've been working through over the last few years, and finally closed off two. So we've only got one more outstanding from our 2019 audit, which is really good, and that's the drug and alcohol policy, which is heading towards the clearinghouse at the end of this month. So we're really happy about that, and we've just finished our 2023 audit, and the feedback from the audit risk team is we're in a much better space than we were in 2019, and that 45,001 journey has really helped, I guess, fill in a few of those gaps that we're missing. So we're really happy with that. And just touching on the report, I know over the last couple of times that I've been sitting in front of you, we've been talking about the increase in assault and violence and our numbers. And I know I was asked at the last meeting, are we worried about the increase in numbers? And the answer at the time was, no, because we've actually got a really good culture change, and I want to really reiterate that it's a really good positive culture shift. We were probably underreporting in the past. Through no fault of anyone's. It's just, we're now educating our staff on what's acceptable behaviour and what we won't tolerate. So therefore now things that were probably, it's just part of my job, we're actually reporting that, and we're empowering our staff to actually take note and put that into the system, which I think's, kudos to the team. So that's obviously increasing our reporting, but it's giving a really clear picture now of where we need to put our focus on, and starting to delve into some of the controls and some mitigating factors that we can put in place to help support our staff from that wellbeing perspective as well. What we're also doing now, and you'll see in the report that we've broken it down into some of the mitigating factors that we're sort of starting to slowly introduce into different business units and seeing how they're working. And we're really receiving some really good feedback. Particularly, I want to call out, say, the libraries. I know that although their reporting is increasing, and a couple of meetings ago, there was a Lagoima for our information in regards to the libraries, but they're actually giving really positive feedback. The library staff are feeling supported by one of my business partners who's embedded herself down in there, and we've got good security, we've got good training that's going on with our staff on, I guess, how to support these members of the public that are coming in and struggling, and trying to eliminate some of that violence, aggression that's happening. We really starting to get a really good relationship with our local community constables. They're starting to work with our community liaison team as well, and just really identifying some of these, I guess, key players out in the network on how we can support I guess the people who are creating these violence and aggression issues. Some of our ASOs are our animal welfare, animal officers, and our parking wardens. They're wearing body-worn cameras now, and they're getting shown how to activate those when they are feeling at risk, and we're seeing how that de-escalates the situation, and we're obviously teaching them on how to use those appropriately as well, which is a really cool de-escalation and behaviour management sort of tool that we're adding to their kit as well. We're also looking at the public safety and design as well. So we're part of different workshops on when a building's getting built, how can we actually plan to have good safety measures in place prior to any spade in the ground happens, really. So it's something that we're thinking about as well. And then finally, I just want to sort of talk about the civic development due diligence processes that's happening down there. And I guess a big driver in that, the business partner that's supporting that area as well is feeding into the board and looking at some of the critical risks that are happening down there as well. And the feedback is really positive through to the business partner that's supporting that area. And there's been a lot of due diligence work happening down Dive Cres, and finally that car park's going to be open in the next few days, I hear. So so a lot of work that's happening down there, but a lot of due diligence is happening. And we've also just released due diligence guidelines for the leadership team on how to do due diligence right, and local government and business leaders forum put up that document, and we've kind of put it into a TCC version to help our GMs, etc., when they do their due diligence as well. So.
Kia ora. Thank you for your report and your summary. My question really was around the increase in numbers, and you've answered that already, because I did think whether it was due to more staff understanding the risks and are now reporting. So I'll just add on that question. In your view, do you think staff fully understand now, or can we expect in the next report for those numbers to go up even more? And or do you think we've hit the peak and those are the numbers that we can be expecting going forward, or will we be expecting lower numbers?
The good question. I think first part of that question, have we educated all the staff on risk? Probably not. But we're certainly on our way to there. We've got 12 workshops coming up around how to manage risk in the next 6 weeks. So it'll certainly help our staff understand their risk profile, but then that is doing that sort of middle management into project managers. So that has to cascade through to obviously the 1,100 staff that we've got now. I don't think you could see that there'll be a peak. In health and safety, it's, I guess, ebbs and flows, but yeah, I'd certainly like to see us get on top of the violence and aggression in the sort of next 6 to 12 months. I think it's a social issue, not just a TCC issue. But we're trying to work with those, obviously, different areas of the social network. I guess, police, Ministry of Social Development, etc., as well, working with other councils as well. So one of my business partners went up to Auckland and checked out what they were doing up there. They have like a community hub where they have someone from Ministry of Social Development sit inside their libraries once a week to support, different individuals that have that need. So yeah, we're just looking around. Christchurch City Council's just released It's Not Okay, sort of similar campaign where it's a zero tolerance for violence and aggression towards staff and really empowering them. So yeah, I don't think we're on top of it, but we're certainly we've got some good controls now to support our staff on what's good and what's bad.
Thank you. Yeah, around hitting that peak, I know that it is ebbs and flows, and it's more around, is this a clear reflection of the amount of aggression and assaults that are happening, or could we say that, well, only 50% are being reported right now and we can expect that number to increase, but we are trying to do things to manage that and de-escalate that behaviour?
Yeah, I think now that we've got a standard and we're empowering our staff to say it's not okay, I couldn't give you an exact number yet, but yeah, it's certainly a starting point. Yeah, I wouldn't even put a number on it yet, but it's certainly a really good starting point now to empower our staff to say it's not okay, zero tolerance, really.
Hario, one of the other correlations at the start of this meeting, we saw the movement of interest rates. And when you see the cost of capital go up and the availability for businesses and communities to thrive, you do see a correlation with antisocial behaviour. So that can be an indicator. The other indicator is when you change your business model. For example, as we repatriate city beautification tasks, we take on more customer-facing activities in the community. We also take on some heavy machinery as well. It is inevitable that you will see a correlation between reporting of risks. But those two factors, one is existential, but I think that's an indicator, and the other is the way we run our business as well. So I think Darren's right, we can't accurately predict it, but I'd say those are the indicators.
Thank you. Just a quick question. Just in terms of the table on page 151, we were talking about community services and libraries. I assume that's right across the city, and also assume that the city centres probably has more challenges than our others, but are we picking up issues in our other libraries?
Yes, yeah, we report on all of our libraries, including our mobile library as well. So all incidents, yeah, Go Greerton would be up there with a fair amount of incidents that come through. But yeah, I guess the city centre is the main hub. But yeah, that we certainly capture in that data is all libraries.
Yeah, I was just picking up on Alistair's point about activity levels. So, we heard earlier in our meeting that our capital program's gone to from 100 to 300 and heading 400, which obviously means that there's a heck of a lot more work going on. I guess we always want the safety data to be trending down, and the ideal world is that it's zero across all sectors. But in reality, when you're doing more, the risks are more, and therefore the likelihood of accidents is that much greater. So I guess if we continue just to report the numbers, we may get quite alarmed as that increases, and it's right that we should be. But how do we kind of test against the increased inactivity, and what's the right kind of relativity there? Yeah,
that's a good question, Stephen, and we're looking at that currently, and we're actually testing that down with the civic development. So the business partner down there is obviously reporting to the board, and they're wanting to know how our critical risks are being managed. Okay, so we've got CPAD or CARTA, which is obviously our project management tool, and we're now just put a business case through on how we can actually get some data for the PMs to put in on how many critical risks are sitting within each individual program of work, and from there we'll be able to manage how the critical risks are being managed monthly, and how many are outstanding, how many had a safety and design session, how many have had visits each month, and all that sort of stuff. So very early stages of conversation around that, but definitely I totally agree with you, because if we're just reporting numbers, I guess you don't get a real true reflection of how the critical risks are being managed. So yeah, that's definitely something we're looking at for long-term reporting, 100%.
Numbers relative to activity, isn't it? That's the kind of
test. Definitely, and that'll tie back to your due diligence visits and what key focus points that you want to have each month, and definitely that's something that if an incident did happen, something that WorkSafe would be looking at is what our critical risks are and how we're managing them, and how many due diligence focus points are there. So yeah, definitely we're trying to capture all of that. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Stephen actually took the first part of my question, which is great. So just to dovetail on the back of that, and it might be a short question, because I'm guessing the data that you present in this report are council employees, the numbers, so the reporting, the near misses, and so again, I don't want to hark back to it again, but it's. For me, there's a perception, and I'll do it. I'll try and illustrate by way of example. Let's say when the new civic building's going up, it's a council-led project. A crane, something might go wrong, fall on a group of people, and they're injured. People sort of associate with council, although we know it's a contractor or subcontractor. So at any stage, and again, I don't want to overcomplicate your life already, because I'm sure it's complicated enough in this space. But have you ever reported on health and safety with organisations that are involved in a council-led project? And I'll tell you why I'm coming from this, because I sit on a number of different organisations and businesses, and the reporting is very similar, if not the same as this. And we keep a monitor, and we make sure we hear any incidences involved in the buildings, what we're doing, so that we can trend and track, as Stephen alluded to. The capital program's huge, there's lots of work going on, it's naturally going to increase. So we want to make sure whoever we contract and it goes along with us in terms of we're monitoring that they're keeping their health and safety programs as efficient as ours. So we actually get reports on externals as well. So it's a long way of asking, so these are numbers, great for our organisation. But if it's a council-led project, something goes wrong, are we aware of those numbers and what's going on from a holistic health and safety point of view, for all involved, not just our people?
Yeah. Again, a good question. And I guess that although we can't, unless an organisation wants to share what their health and safety numbers are, etc. But one thing that we do when we go to tender, we factor that into their health and safety practices. So when they submit a tender, let's just say a piece of road's getting built, okay, and when they submit their tender documents, there's a whole suite of health and safety questionnaires, etc., that we go through and we review that. And one of those questions is their health and safety history, etc., reporting. And we look at that, okay, and that's part of our scoring system, whether they meet the threshold to go into the next stage of that tender review. So that's where we do review that, and my business partners work with the project managers on reviewing that data, whether they've done a similar project or they've got the right staff, the right capability. So that's where we do our due diligence in that piece. I guess the second part of your question, if I get this right, is around how do we ensure our contractors, we're capturing their numbers. We've broken in that contractor management standard that I spoke about earlier, we've sort of broken it down into 4 categories. So we've got our CapEx works that we engage contractors. We've got our ongoing maintenance contractors. So you think of EnviroWaste for our sustainability and waste, okay? We're working really closely with those ongoing maintenance contractors to ensure that they're reporting us each month to make sure that, multiple different streams of data, but, one of them is their health and safety reporting. So we capture that and we review that, and that is spoken about on a monthly basis. So hopefully that's answered that question.
I'd like to move that we receive the report. Stephen? Rohario, thank you. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you very much. And then we've got Kath, Lagoima and privacy requests. Kath.
Right, everyone. I'll take it that you've read the report. I'd like to say it's exciting, but it's been a good year. I don't have anything terribly exciting to report. Along with kind of what you've been hearing with health and safety, although on a lower scale, obviously. If there's lots going on in the city, there's lots of people who have opinions about it and obviously want to ask us about those projects. So that's reflected in our numbers. Pretty good year for us. No complaints upheld by the Ombudsman and none gone to investigation with the Privacy Commissioner. So that's been really good. So all in all, a few increases, as you can see, and we're starting to build some trends now that we're doing this reporting. So we're starting to map across the 3 years, and you can see there's blips in there. March was a big one, obviously, and that was due to the Taxpayers Union getting ready to prepare their report, plus Cyclone Gabriel also had an impact. There were lots of people asking questions from their personal perspectives and just in general around what's happening in the city with weather events, so those types of things. So even though we had and that probably led to the increase in numbers for the year. Otherwise, it's relatively consistent, really. So, any questions?
The blip in March was the only one that stood out, really.
And it was significant. And actually, what was great is we still managed to, hit our KPI, which was really good, considering that's, quite a workload when you get multiple compared to everything else. It's all
Were the Cyclone Gabriel ones, were they from people who worried?
There was a combination. Obviously, people impacted, and we're still dealing with some of that, and also just general questions around what's going on for council. What's council doing about these types of situations? Yeah.
Any questions? Kath? No? Nothing?
Thank you. Enjoy lunch.
Must be due for lunch. Someone like to move that we receive the report? Bruce? Wayne? Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favour? Against? Carried. Right. So can someone then move that we go into public excluded for the reasons outlined in the agenda? Shad, thank you. Rohario, thank you. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much. So we'll adjourn for lunch. It is now 1:21, so let's resume at 2, public excluded. Is that enough time for lunch?